drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. After a 1-week hiatus. Who missed Socialism Saturday last week? I know I did, but as you guys know, I was at Socialism in real life last week, which was super duper fun for me. But we're back now, and we're really, really lucky today. You know what? Actually, it's funny because we're going to do something today we don't normally do on Socialism Saturday. On Socialism Saturday, we usually watch the real far left, the farthest of the far left, the most dystopian of the dystopian. And I often remind people that democratic socialists are not the real far left. I know that conservatives think they are not. Actually, real radical revolutionary socialists consider the democratic socialists of America to be way too close to capitalism to be a worthy part of the far left. But one of the things I've learned in the rabbit holes I've gone down with the Unwoke Wiki project that some of us are working on is that there are caucuses within the Democratic Socialists of America. You guys, my mic is not working. Hang on. Is it better now? Better. Is it louder now? I can turn my mic up. Is that better? Sounds better to me. Anyway, we'll go with that. It sounds like an empty room. Hang on. You know why? Because it's not my microphone. How's this? Is this better? Is this better? Testing, 1, 2, 3. You know, there had to be technical difficulties on the first day back of Socialism Saturday. Yeah, for some reason, StreamYard decided to change my microphone settings. I don't know what happened there. Can we start over? Welcome to Socialism Saturday, where we watch the real far left, the most dystopian of the dystopian. So we're actually doing something a little different today in that normally we do not watch the Democratic Socialists of America because the real radical revolutionary socialists consider them to be way too close to capitalism to be considered real socialists, right? But there are caucuses within the Democratic Socialists of America in which they're actively trying to pull the DSA more far left. And so sometimes those caucuses kind of get their way. And I couldn't help myself. Normally, this is something we would not watch. I couldn't help myself because just 12 days ago on the Democratic Socialists of America YouTube page, they posted an episode about Marxism and queer liberation. Achieving liberation of the queer community requires realizing the intersecting nature of all the U.S. cultural oppressions, including class oppression, ties the liberation of all to end capitalism. It's almost as though this is not actually a Gnostic sex cult. It's almost as though the goal of queer Marxism has nothing to do with a Gnostic sex cult, James Lindsay and Logan Lansing. It's almost as though when you actually listen to the left, instead of cherry picking academic papers that suit your Gnostic sex cult theory narrative, and you actually go and listen to them, they tell you that Marxism and queer liberation is all about ending capitalism, mother effers. You want to go to a meeting of the Gnostic sex cult? Yeah, me too. Me too. Tell me where to find a meeting of the Gnostic sex cult. I've been to socialist meetings. I've never been to a meeting of the Gnostic sex cult. Today, queer oppression is being used not only to holy shit, look at this. I didn't read this before this. This is this description is just so beautiful. Today, queer oppression is being used not only to sustain capitalism, but help grow fascism. When so many people's personal hierarchy of needs requires them to spend their limited resources struggling simply to survive an onslaught of existential attacks, how does a socialist movement grow and build class consciousness? How has capitalism infected liberal social analysis of so-called identity politics and activism in those realms? How can socialism provide a better analysis and reinvent activism in those realms? What can socialism in general learn from queer analysis and activism? We've got Genevieve. Genevieve is the co-chair of the TSA Trans Rights and Bodily Autonomy Caucus. I keep telling you guys, they lump trans rights and reproductive justice together. So anytime socialists are talking about abortion, they're also talking about trans and queer liberation, particularly for kids. We've got Rashid X, he, him, a member of the Lakefront DSA in Illinois, a member of the National DSA, We've got Emma P., a published researcher in neuroscience and engineering. Well, golly gee. Golly gee. Anyway, that's what we're watching tonight. We'll see how this goes. Couple orders of business before we get started. Number one, welcome to Socialism Saturday, guys. If you are new and or relatively new to Socialism Saturday, please let us know in the chat. I can see chats on YouTube. I can see chats on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, and I can see on Rumble chats. Please make sure you're mounting the like button on whatever platform you're watching on right now. I would really appreciate it. Mounting the like button lets YouTube know to actually recommend my content for once, rather than shadow banning the ever-loving F out of my channel like it's been doing for years. So you can really help me out there. Please make sure you're also subscribed on whatever platform you're watching on. Couple of orders of business. Number one, please make sure sometime during this presentation you head over to my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Make sure you are signed up for free email updates. You can also support my work by becoming a member at $8 a month, $80 for a year. And what that means is you are funding independent and undercover journalism, like the journalism I was doing last week out of the University of Colorado at Boulder, where I went undercover at a gender ideology conference. There's going to be more materials coming out from that conference this week. I just had a really busy week, so I'm sorry I didn't get out sooner. But the fact is that I have a lot of stuff to do and catch up on when I do this stuff. Well, that's not true for everyone, bro. That's not true for everyone. I'll tell you that right now. As many people as I hear your videos show up in my feed daily, I also hear from people that they got unsubscribed from my channel literally in the middle of my stream. So your lived experience is not everyone's lived experience. Let's see, where was I? Yeah, you can subscribe to my Substack, fund my work if you want to. You get a variety of perks when you do that. Another way you can fund my work is by heading over to Unwoke Art. That is the Unwoke Art store at unwokeart.com. Pick up some sweet merch. There's only about a week left to get a couple limited edition items, including the Make McCarthyism Great Again design that will only be in the store until the end of the month. We've also got the March limited edition exclusive Unwoke Wiki design, which I think is a pretty cool ass design. It's a Plague Doctor tarot card on the front, and then on the back it points people to the Unwoke Wiki where they can see primary source documentation that we are building out in order to make sure we are actually building a way to be able to track socialist activism around the country, both the individual activists and the organizations, what they're pushing, so that we can go in at a moment's notice and figure out what's going on and make connections between organizations. This is a first of its kind project that is solely reliant on primary source evidence. No pinky swear, trust me, bro. No conservative propaganda, no any propaganda, only primary source evidence. Sam says, I see your videos in my feed, but I've also had issues. I am the person Carlin is talking about who got unsubscribed mid-stream. It's true, guys. If you think you're subscribed to my channel, just double check and just make sure. Last thing I want to show you guys is this sweater I'm actually wearing right now. I know it's kind of hard to see, but this is what it looks like, and it looks awesome in red. This is the real Marxism sweater. This is one of my favorite designs in the store. I wear this design all the time. You can get it in both red and black, and it looks just as cool in both. And again, all this does go to help support the work I'm doing, and I really, really appreciate it. All right, one last order of business. And this is for people who are new to Socialism Saturday, okay? Because this is not like other streams that you're going to watch on the internet. In order for this to work, listen, watching socialism can be a little overwhelming, especially when you first get started. And I want to just set expectations for what this is. You are in a class. Yeah, we're going to have fun. Yeah, I'm going to have a couple of beers. Yeah, like we can joke back and forth a little bit, but at the end of the day, I want everyone to understand that you are in a class tonight. There's no shit posting. There's no nonsense. If I tell you to stop doing something, please stop doing it. This is an excellent tip from Naptown. You can take a screenshot of this helpful guide that I put up every single week, just in case you start to get confused. I am the teacher of the class. You are the student in the class. If you don't like me, if you don't like my attitude, if you don't like my tone, you can get up and leave at any time and go watch something else. In fact, you go over to Naptown's channel and get caught up on the Thorpe drama or whatever else nonsense is going on that's much lighter than the content that we're doing. That's fine. I'm not going to make fun of you for leaving. I'm just saying that don't make my life difficult just because you're having feelings, okay? We are here because socialists speak in a coded language, and the best way to learn that language and become inoculated to that language is by listening to what they say in the real world. You have to keep in mind that they are using the same vocabulary as us. They are not using the same dictionary. They have different definitions for the words, and if you don't understand what those definitions are, you fundamentally do not understand them. The purpose of this exercise is not to debunk them. I need you to rein in every single desire you have to say, that's stupid, that's not the right definition, real socialism has never been tried, don't they know it's killed 100 million people? Just rein it in. It's not as though we haven't heard it before. I've been doing this for literally years. We have heard everything before. And the fact of the matter is that if debunking them was all that was required, then they wouldn't be winning because they get debunked literally every single day and it makes no effing difference. Every ounce of energy you put into debunking them is an ounce of energy you could be putting into understanding them. And I would really prefer you spend your time that way. Number 3, if you have questions, please ask. Now, all questions are acceptable. And I really want to make sure, especially for beginners, I know it can be a little bit hard to speak up because we got a group of people that's here all the time. So it might seem like they're in a little clique and you aren't welcome and all that stuff. But please speak up if you have questions. If you have an outburst, if you have a temper tantrum, if you start like making a fuss in the chat because you don't agree with something I say, instead of asking a question, that's not going to work out well for you. Our goal is to understand. I have watched more hours of this bullshit than anyone else in the world. And I promise promise you, I have a different understanding than most of you do, and many in my audience have that same understanding. We will help you to understand, but you got to speak up and ask. However, if I find that you are asking the same question over and over and over and over and over again every single week because you're expecting me to give you a different answer, I promise you, I'm the most consistent bitch on the internet. I'm not going to change my answer. Okay? This is the type of stuff that will get you put in a timeout in my chat. I will say whatever I want to say, and you trying to say, yo, okay, we get it, mom, is going to get you put in a 5-minute timeout. You want to test my boundaries, I'm more than happy to push back. You want to start creating nonsense and whine and complain because you're not getting what you want right away, I'm more than happy to push back. Rule number 4, normal chat rules apply. Don't be a dick and no whining. I'm allowed to do whatever I want. This is my house, but you are a guest in my house. You will not insult me. You will not insult other people in the audience. And if you do, I'm going to tell you to stop. If you don't cut it out, then you're going to get removed and you're not going to get a second chance. Number 2, no whining. If I ask you to stop doing something, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about your feelings. I don't care about your feelings. You need to manage that yourself. So don't be a dick, no whining. Lastly, and this should be made clear by the person I just put in a timeout, don't argue with me. Again, I've watched more of this stuff than you have. I've embedded myself deeper in this than any of you have, and that's not an own or anything like that. I'm happy to do this stuff to be able to explain it. But if you're going to try to question what I'm saying or you're going to bring your feelings in my chat, that's probably not going to go well for you. Okay? So if you're going to try, I guess bring your A game, but very few people tend to better me on that regard. All right. That's all I have. Now we can get started. Oh, by the way, look what I got. Look what I got at the conference in Colorado. I won myself a progress flag, a giant ass progress flag. Do you know how I won this? I had to spin a wheel. There was a booth set up from, let's see. It's called Over the Rainbow in Boulder County, which provides services for trans and queer kids. And they had a booth set up at the conference and they had a trivia wheel. And I spun the trivia wheel and I was sweating it too. I was like, if I get this trivia question wrong, I'm never going to be able to show my face again. And they said, what does the intersex flag look like? Does anyone know? Does anyone know what the intersex flag looks like? Don't cheat. I am. At some point, I'm going to paint the whole back wall red, and I'm going to put up all my socialist propaganda. I'm going to hang this flag in a place of honor with all the rest of my socialist propaganda. The intersex flag is gold with a yellow with a purple circle. Yes. And so that was the trivia question I had to answer to get a flag. Yay. And that's appropriate because we are watching Marxism and Queer Liberation tonight. Go grab a beer if you need one. I'm going to get mine. Let's get this party started, guys. We got an hour and 42 minutes to go.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and kick off our program here, but before that, I've got a few little housekeeping items. So first and foremost, welcome to Marxism and Queer Liberation, Why Socialism Needs Queer Liberation and Queer Liberation Needs Socialism.
Queer Liberation Needs Socialism.
Is co-sponsored. We're very thankful.
Yeah.
This event is co-sponsored by the Queer Socialist Working Group and the Trans Rights and Bodily Autonomy Campaign Commission, both part of DSA. So we're very thankful to be bringing in a lot of folks for this event. NPEC, this is an NPEC event. NPEC is the National Political Education Committee of DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. We're going to have one more event this term, so folks can look out for that. And when I say term, I mean that folks apply for an MPEC term. So applications are open
True,
right now
Chad.
for MPEC.
True.
So if you're interested in getting involved with MPEC, if you're interested
got
in getting
possessed
involved
by a
with
demon and all I
any of
got
the
was a
groups that
flag.
folks are representing tonight, it's very easy to do. So what I'll go ahead is read the description that we created for this event. Then I'll go ahead and introduce our guests. I'll just give us
Hang
a little
on.
preview of this.
This is a good question from Akshay. Akshay says, will the DSA join forces with the revolutionary communists of America at some point in the future, or will they fight each other for dominance? Actually, the revolutionary communists of America, for people who don't know, are that new political party that popped up a couple weeks ago. They're revolutionary communists. You might have seen them all over Twitter and stuff like that because they got like 2 million views on their launch video, and they are a real political party, and they're growing very quickly, and everyone should be afraid of them, even though the conservative influencers on Twitter are pretending they don't exist, but they do exist, and they are a real thing, and they are organized in 30 plus cities throughout the United States. And it's kind of like a nightmare, but whatever. Anyway, here's how I know that the revolutionary communists of America will not join forces with the DSA. Because the revolutionary communists of America were explicit in their videos when they launched the party to say, we hate the DSA. The DSA is too close to capitalism. F them. We need a real revolutionary communist party. So no, they're not going to join forces. They're going to go like this. If anything, the Revolutionary Communist Party is going to pull the DSA more left and get the members of the DSA to join them instead of the other way around.
Schedule, and then we'll launch right into it. So, achieving the liberation of the queer community requires realizing the intersecting nature of all U.S. cultural oppressions, including class oppression, ties the liberation of all to the end of capitalism.
Oh.
Today, queer liberation is being used not only to, today queer oppression is being used not only to sustain capitalism, but to help grow fascism. When so many people's personal hierarchy of needs requires them to spend their limited resources struggling simply to survive an onslaught of existential attacks, how does a socialist movement grow and build class consciousness? How does capitalism, how has capitalism infected liberal social analysis of the so-called identity politics and activism in those realms? How can socialism provide a better analysis and reinvent activism in those realms? And then finally, what can socialism in general learn from queer analysis and activism? So we've got three folks
sounds like he's in a coffee
hear
shop.
from today. First, Genevieve is the co-author of DSA's Trans Rights and Bodily Autonomy group, the resolution. She's also a founding member of the Ithaca Tenants Union and the Ithaca Solidarity Slate, which has elected 4 organized socialists to the city council. So thanks so much.
Guys, just so you know, this is not something we generally focus on Socialism Saturday, but anytime you see a tenants' rights organization, they're socialist. Like that it all comes from the same place. But the reason I don't bring them up that often is honestly, like, I don't really see them doing things that I think are like dangerous to society. Like maybe more annoyances. I just want people to be aware that all tenants' rights organizations are socialist.
So much for being here, Genevieve. We have
I do
Rashad.
want to correct, just to give credit in the right place. I didn't co-author the resolution. I'm the co-chair of the National Campaign Commission.
The co-chair of the National Campaign. You're right. It does say co-chair instead of co-author. Thank you so much. Folks will be able to correct all of my little slip-ups. Thank you. So Rashad X is a proud member of Lakefront DSA in Northeast Illinois and a member of DSA's National Political Committee. Most of his work is focused on ensuring that DSA is fighting the imperial police state through political independence.
Well, actually, this just did become relevant, didn't it? Yeah, I bet you tenants' rights does cover squatters. Tenants' rights are going to be inherently anti-landlord because landlords, of course, are a form of like private property that they want to get rid of because they don't think landlords should exist, and this is why you're seeing all this squatter stuff come up. Good point, Gloria. Kim Iverson covered the Green Party candidate who was at the free and equal presidential debate, which included libertarian. Oh, maybe something to look into. Appreciate it, Dragontail. Thanks.
And ensuring DSA is a leader in winning the battle for democracy. Both of these themes inspire his involvement in the trans rights and bodily autonomy campaign, where DSA is fighting the unpopular far-right agenda implemented through the US's undemocratic political system. Thanks, Rashad. And we also are joined by Emma. Emma is a published researcher in both neuroscience and engineering. Her love has always been philosophy, hence she's been a lifelong member of the working class. She's organized outside of socialist spaces, from multi-city protests to state-level building and leading, as well as collaborating with national organizations. And she has contributed nationally behind the scenes for 15 years, doing a whole variety of activities. So thank you so much for being here. What we're going to do today is hear 10 minutes each from Genevieve, Rashad, and Emma. If you go over a little bit, that's fine, about the description that folks heard, a general statement, if you will. Then we'll go into question and answer. I have several possible questions here. We'll go back and forth between our panelists, discuss those for a little bit, and then we'll bring in the audience. And audience, thank you so much for being here. You can put your questions in the Q&A section below. You can do that at any time. And then during the audience Q&A section, I'll read some of those out, time willing, and we'll engage in a conversation around that. So, due to our little technical debacle is too strong of a word, but due to a little scrambling here, I never had a chance to ask our panelists who wanted to go first. So, Genevieve, can I put you on the hot seat and ask if you'd like to kick us off?
You can, yeah.
Thank you so much.
So I think very often in doing the queer liberation, like trans organizing work, about a framing that I think Martin Luther King Jr. is most famous for deploying, about like that some people see peace as like the absence of war, and that he was positing that it is in fact the presence of harmony. And I think that when we talk about liberation, it's, and under the like conditions that we're currently struggling, we are focused very intently, for obvious reasons, on like anti-oppression work. And in our sort of practical and immediate reality, like the idea of creating liberation and creating harmony for ourselves is functionally equivalent with the idea of like stopping oppression and stopping this sort of systemic violence that's perpetrated against oppressed
capitalism.
people. But a lot of what we'll probably be talking about tonight is past the immediate circumstances of like these horrific attacks by the far right on trans rights. What does actually liberation in the longer term mean for queer people and for all people in this country and across the world?
What does it mean?
I do want to, though, in my opening comments, talk about actually what sort of queer and trans liberation means to our enemies. I think that it's...
Hang on. Wow, you sure can't judge a book by its cover. These two look completely normal. Guys, most socialists look completely normal. I hate to break it to you, and this is, again, this is like a problem that's been perpetuated by things like libs of TikTok. Most socialists look completely normal. Most socialists do not look like hardcore queer activists. Most socialists do not have pink hair. Most socialists do not look like socialists. You probably know socialists that you don't think are socialists because they don't act crazy and they don't have pink hair. The only way to know, they smell normal too. They don't all smell bad. The only way to know whether or not you're talking to a socialist is to learn the language of socialism. If you don't learn the language, you're going to be talking to socialists every day that you just don't know are socialists because you haven't learned the language yet. And like, if, well, no, bro. Okay, it's going to be one of those fucking nights, isn't it? It's going to be one of those nights. Okay, whatever.
It's pretty fair to say that for a lot of recent human history, the philosophies of socialism and the philosophy of fascism have been locked in a battle for control of society and that even in places where like there's a neoliberal capitalist sort of like
Bing!
centrist quote unquote control of a government or an economy, there are fascist fringes that are struggling for power. There are socialist fringes that are struggling for power. And that describes the state that we're in America today, although fascists are much closer to control of our government than socialists are. Fascists have always focused very early on in their political organizing on targeting queer and trans people. Folks may or may not know that when the Nazi Party was coming to power in Germany, the first of many book burning, raid type things that they did, which became like an iconic symbol of their party style of politics, was at what was translated to English, the Institute for Sex Research, which was at the time the world capital of research and like medical technology development around queer and trans healthcare. They burned research that was the only place in the world that existed in understanding trans healthcare. They took lists of the trans patients and then later used those, like took those back to their party and later used them to hunt down and exterminate trans people.
Where was the
They
Institute for
lynched
Sex
the
Research?
first ever transgender woman to receive sex reassignment surgery in the course of that book burning.
Hang on.
And
Hang on. I need to listen to this again. I apologize. Where is that? The Institute for Sex Research? Oh, shit. Motherfucker, God fucking digger. Yep. All right. Let's listen.
Fascists have always focused very early on in their political organizing on targeting queer and trans people. Folks may or may not know that when the Nazi Party was coming to power in Germany, the first of many book burning, raid type things that they did, which became like an iconic symbol of their party style of politics, was at what was translated to English, the Institute for Sex Research, which was at the time the world capital of research and like medical technology.
Well, so even in 1930s Germany, Marxists were already getting into queer ideology. Yep. And you guys know that famous Nazi book burning? Like the one that you always see the footage of? It was the books about queer and trans people from the Institute of Sex Research. That's what it was.
Development around queer and trans healthcare. They burned research that was the only place in the world that existed in understanding trans healthcare. They took lists of the trans patients and then later used those, like took those back to their party and later used them to hunt down and exterminate trans people. They lynched the first ever transgender woman to receive sex reassignment surgery in the course of that book burning. And there's a very like deliberate
Yes. I'm thinking of a very specific right-winger that I've heard these talking points from recently. I'm not happy about it. But isn't it ironic that the socialists are sharing the far-right talking points? Yep, indeed.
Reason that they chose that target and that fascist movements have always chosen those targets very early on. And that's because fascism as an ideology is built on biological hierarchy, or I could say hierarchy in general, but they're very, very intent on biological hierarchy. And they believe in men over women. They believe in white people over black people. They believe in justifying and manifesting these hierarchies that are core to their ideology. In particular, when it comes to gender oppression, in their mission to institute white male supremacist hierarchy and control of society, they are very, very threatened in establishing those hierarchies by anybody who crosses the lines of those sort of what they believe are biologically deterministic categories. And so when it comes to like just queer people having same-sex attractions and relationships, or even scarier to them, trans people actually changing our gender, that is threatening to a core foundation of fascist ideology. And they know that they have to eliminate it in order to enact their agenda. What's hard about that for them is that queer identity, unlike other, marginalized identities, like particularly race, is not in any way genetically inherited. So you could wipe out all the queer people, and then in a generation, you're going to have just as many as you did before. So their strategy of like physical extermination isn't effective with queer people. They have to institute cultural extermination that happens in perpetuity, and there's no ever like finishing or end to that project. So that's why it's one of the first things that they go for. It's why they're so intently focused on it. And it's why they're attacking trans rights in America today. And I think that as socialists, like we are trying to stop fascism from happening all the time. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the panel discussion, but the obvious question for us in getting into this area of organizing work and rights policy and so on is, what does this have to do with economic liberation and class and so on? And it's a good and complicated question, but I actually think it's a lot easier to understand in terms of why is the existence of queer and trans people so threatening to fascists? And it's because it is threatening to the very idea of instituting social hierarchy. And so in seeking to abolish social hierarchy, whether that's racial...
Pop quiz, why do socialists want to abolish all hierarchy? Because that's what they're saying, right? They're saying fascism is instituting a social hierarchy, whereas they want to eliminate all hierarchy. What does it mean to eliminate all hierarchy? And why do they want to do it? Eliminating all hierarchy is equity. Yup. Because hierarchy upholds capitalism. How does hierarchy uphold capitalism? Equity is about eliminating hierarchy. You cannot have equity without and have a hierarchy at the same time. Hierarchies are inequitable. Hierarchies equal meritocracy and isn't equity. To achieve equity, so they can bring about equity, you can't have a hierarchy in equity. They want equity and no gender binary, while eliminating gender entirely or eliminating the gender binary is going to... They think that eliminating the gender binary is going to eliminate the patriarchy or all... the only way to bring about gender equity is to eliminate gender, essentially. Equity to enable the collective. Hierarchies were created by capitalism because capitalism meant some people had more private property than others. Remember, guys, capitalism is always and forever defined as private property ownership. Equity, equity, equity. Well done, guys.
Hierarchy, gender hierarchy, economic hierarchy, etc. The existence of trans people in society is in itself a protest of the institution and perpetuation of a hierarchical system like that.
Bing.
It's very, very threatening to it. And becoming trans is like, you can become trans in a way that you can't just like decide to become rich one day, right? It's a lot easier to maintain those boundaries with economic class. Yeah, I think that's what I'll add to it, and I'll turn it over to my other panelists for their responses.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Genevieve. Rashad, are you okay with going next?
Rather than answering the question why queer liberation needs socialism and why socialism needs queer liberation, I'll be addressing why queer liberation needs revolutionary social democracy. But for the sake of more modern language, I'll refer to it as revolutionary democratic socialism.
Oh, good.
After all, this event was titled Marxism and Queer Liberation. And one of the most important elements of Marxism is the centrality of democracy. From Marx stating that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class to win the battle for democracy. To Engels stating that the democratic republic is the form of the dictatorship of the proletariat, to lesser known comrades in the Spanish Civil War who not only who did not limit their horizons when the bourgeois state co-opted the framing of a democratic republic. They instead said, we are not fighting for a democratic republic. A new day is dawning, which is the socialist republic. A Marxist politics that incorporates this history of recognizing the centrality of democracy to socialist transformation is what I call revolutionary democratic socialism. Revolutionary because it opposes the current state form and seeks to smash it and install a government in service of the working class majority. It is to
Hang on. This is the DSA, but what I need you guys to understand is there are certain caucuses within the DSA that are more far left than other caucuses, and the Queer Marxism Caucus is one of those caucuses. So not all the DSA is this far left. These are like real socialists that have gotten into the DSA that are trying to pull it left. Well, they all read prepared statements. That's mostly what they do.
be compared to reformist democratic socialism, which limits its horizons on winning seats within the existing undemocratic state and trying to use that existing state machinery to begin socialist transformation of society. Queer liberation needs revolutionary democratic socialism because to eliminate the political conditions leading to queer oppression by the state means eliminating the tools the right is using to implement its minoritarian agenda. These tools, such as the Senate, the courts, and the Electoral College, each of these institutions are bulwarks against the anti-queer, anti-trans, and anti-bodily autonomy agenda.
Oh, what did he just say? What did he just say? The Senate, the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court are all anti-queer. Why do they consider the Senate, the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court to be anti-queer? Let me know your answers in the chat. We're going to listen to that one again. Because the American government upholds capitalism? Yup. Because they uphold capitalism. All of those are hierarchies. Yup. Yes, this is the answer that I'm looking for. This is the answer that I'm looking for. Because none of those systems are democratic. They're not elected by the people. Remember, guys, socialists believe that the only real form of democracy is socialism. They believe the Senate, the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court are all unelected by the people directly. And so, therefore, they do not represent true democracy and they should be eliminated. I don't want to see, guys, like, I feel like we have this talk all the time. I don't want to see people just saying capitalism, 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 capitalism every time I ask a pop quiz. I want, if you're going to say capitalism, you need to be specific about it, okay? Like, actually, sir, saying capitalism is just a throwaway answer that makes me think that you guys aren't really listening. Let's listen to this again.
Existing state machinery to begin socialist transformation of society. Queer liberation needs revolutionary democratic socialism because to eliminate the political conditions leading to queer oppression by the state means eliminating the tools the right is using to implement its minoritarian agenda. These tools, such as the Senate, the courts, and the Electoral College, each of these institutions are bulwarks against the anti-queer, anti-trans, and anti-bodily autonomy agenda.
Why are those? I'm going to ask the question again. Why do they consider the Supreme Court, the Electoral College, and the Senate to be bulwarks against an anti-trans and anti-queer agenda? And anyone who says capitalism without giving a further explanation is going to get timed out. Why do they consider the Senate, the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court to be bulwarks against an anti-queer agenda? They're not elected by individuals. They're not directly elected by the people. Why else? Their members weren't chosen by the government, by the people. They were chosen by the government. Why else? Okay, now we're getting closer. They stand in the way of changing the law. Socialists are for direct democracy rather than checks and balances. Ding, 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 ding. That's what it is. That's what it is. They're against checks and balances, guys. They want direct democracy, one vote, one person. They know that if they ever get rid of the Electoral College, they win. This is why the Democrats are pushing to get rid of the Electoral College. They have the majority. As much as conservatives want to beat their chest and say, we're the silent majority, the reality is that conservatives are not the majority. The left is the majority. And they know that if they get rid of the Electoral College, then they will always and perpetually win every election for the rest of their lives. Let's see. I had a couple questions come in. If queer has an alternative meaning... No, Kate, this is one of those times where I feel like I've covered this with you before. Queer does not have an alternative meaning. The meaning of queer is to disrupt normativity. That is the only meaning of queer. It is a far left political ideology designed to disrupt normativity. There is no alternative meaning of queer. The only alternative meaning that exists of queer is the meaning that conservatives have made up to advance a political narrative. But that's not real. The conservative right has no fucking idea about this. So no, there is the one and only definition of queer is a far left political ideology that is designed to disrupt normativity. I also don't know what you mean when you say trans have an alternate meaning, because we've defined trans specifically many times to be an ideology that is about upholding the gender binary in which people transition from one gender to the other. The difference between trans and queer is that trans upholds the gender binary, queer does not uphold the gender binary, queer explicitly wants to abolish it. Those are the only definitions. Anything that you hear from any conservative influencer that is not those definitions is made up foolishness. Let's see. Oceania says, does the socialist alternative have a presence in the DSA? I have no idea what socialist alternative is, so you can look into that and let me know what you find.
They are all enshrined in our nation's undemocratic constitution. A revolutionary democratic socialist approach seeks to unite the struggle for pro-queer reforms and the defense against anti-queer legislation, and merge that with the struggle for a new democratic constitution and to establish a democratic socialist republic with universal and equal suffrage, with proportional representation, and a single federal legislature combining both chambers and the executive branch and the legislative branch, and ultimately ending the influence of money on politics.
Oh, shit. He just really spelled it out, didn't he? He just literally spelled out what they want the socialist states of America to be. Which is, we already talked about why they want to get rid of the Senate, the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court. And then he just said a directly elected democracy where the executive and the legislative branches are combined. Did you guys hear that? Let's listen again. We're going to go back. We're going to go back to here. Okay, so this is the vision for the socialist states of America.
Queer liberation needs revolutionary democratic socialism, because to eliminate the political conditions leading to queer oppression by the state means eliminating the tools the right is using to implement its minoritarian agenda. These tools, such as the Senate, the courts, and the Electoral College, each of these institutions are bulwarks against the anti-queer, anti-trans, and anti-bodily autonomy agenda, and they are all enshrined in our nation's undemocratic constitution. A revolutionary democratic socialist approach seeks to unite the struggle for pro-queer reforms and the defense against anti-queer legislation, and merge that with the struggle for a new democratic constitution and to establish a democratic socialist republic with universal and equal suffrage, with proportional representation, and a single federal legislature combining both chambers and the executive branch and the legislative branch, and ultimately ending the influence of money on politics. Luckily, with the passing of our new 2024 program, DSA has declared its revolutionary democratic socialist orientation. We state that our mission is to win the battle for
Really?
democracy, that our ultimate goal is to win a democratic constitution, and that we seek to use this working class democracy.
Did the DSA update their platform? Did the DSA have some convention or something where they updated their platform? So when they say win the battle for democracy and instill a democratic constitution, what does that mean?
DSA has declared its revolutionary democratic socialist orientation. We state that our mission is to win the battle for democracy, that our ultimate goal is to win a democratic constitution, and that we seek to use this working class democracy for the working class majority to transition to socialism.
A democratic constitution will transition to socialism. What they're literally talking about, guys, is over. I keep telling people the Civil War is not going to be left versus right. It's not going to be red versus blue. It's going to be radical revolutionary socialist versus the government. Their goal is to overthrow the government. Their goal is to abolish the Senate, abolish the Electoral College, abolish the Supreme Court. They want to combine the legislative and executive branches. They want to create a new democratic constitution. Democratic in this sense means socialism. And they're doing this all specifically to transition the United States to socialism. And apparently, the DSA has had some sort of meeting that I'm not aware of where they became more radical and revolutionary than they had in previous years, which is probably a sign that they're being pulled left by all the different collective groups that have been like denouncing the Here's what happened, okay? For the past couple years, and probably before that, but I've only been paying attention for the past couple years, there have been all these different socialist collectivist groups all over the country that have been explicitly denouncing the DSA as not socialist enough. It kind of sounds like the DSA had some meeting where they said, well, in order to keep our membership, we need to move more far left than we were before. So now it kind of seems like the DSA is getting a little bit more revolutionary in its tactics, which should concern everyone, because the DSA is one of the only socialist organizations that is actually effective at getting people elected at the local and even the national level. There are multiple members of the DSA in the United States House of Representatives, like right now. Rottweiler says, I'm starting to suspect the DSA is upgrading their platform to compete or co-opt the Revolutionary Communists of America. As we know, the Revolutionary Communists of America don't like queer Marxism. These people know the RCA might get in their way. The RCA is going to pull membership from them. That's the explicit goal of the RCA, is to pull membership from the DSA because they want to convince them that the DSA is not far left enough. Well, that's just great. Another new nightmare uncovered on Socialism Saturday while James Lindsay is complaining about a Gnostic sex cult.
So a revolutionary democratic socialist approach also needs the movement for queer liberation, because it is a movement at the front lines of combating anti-democratic state institutions, proving time and time again through ballot initiatives from Kansas to Ohio, and I know to my comrades in Florida who are going to win, that the working class majority doesn't agree with the right wing's culture war. Merging the revolutionary democratic socialist movement with the clear liberation movement is a strategic necessity, or else we risk leaving the energy that I saw Genevieve.
Merging the Democratic Socialists of America movement with the queer liberation movement is a necessity.
Win that the working class majority doesn't agree with the right wing's culture war. Merging the revolutionary democratic socialist movement with the clear liberation movement is a strategic necessity, or else we risk leaving the energy that I saw Genevieve facilitate in our turbo call this morning untapped. The energy that I see in my small chapter and that was key to its growth was a focus on queer liberation. That energy would remain untapped. And the potential I see in my queer coworkers, that revolutionary energy will remain untapped. Luckily, a revolutionary democratic socialist approach is DSA's approach. And the merger of the revolutionary democratic socialism movement and the queer liberation movement will happen within this beautiful, independent working class party we're building here. Fight the Constitution, win a socialist republic, achieve queer liberation.
What? Fight the Constitution, win a socialist republic, achieve queer liberation. Queer liberation cannot be achieved until we have a socialist republic in which the Constitution has been overthrown. Does everyone get it now? This was 12 days ago. This was 12 days ago.
Merger of the revolutionary democratic socialism movement and the queer liberation movement will happen within this beautiful, independent working class party we're building here. Fight the Constitution, win a socialist republic, achieve queer liberation.
Thanks, Rashad. And Emma, we'll turn it over to you.
So just a little quick bookkeeping up
We met
front.
Emma before.
I speak very.
Who remembers Emma? We met Emma before when we did a spy stream inside one of their organizing calls. I like Emma. I know Emma is queer and a little insane and obviously a socialist, but I feel like Emma has a good heart and I don't want to see anyone making fun of Emma. For real, be nice.
Slowly, unless you're from the South, in which case I speak normally. I also have trouble breathing, so if I pause, I'm getting to something. Just give me a second.
Don't be unnecessarily bitchy and aggressive.
I want to thank Impact for doing this. I really wanted this to happen. I'm very excited about it. Great group of people. Luke didn't hit it too hard, but applications are open. I've been very lucky to participate for almost a year now. I encourage you to apply. So I'm going to use some of my personal experience and work my way into an analogy that I suspect I'll probably use multiple times during this talk. When I was a kid, you could still see headlines like Perverts March, or to describe gay pride marches, right? It's really hard to find information on queer organizing. What I could find was information on Black liberation. And one of the things I started running into reading about Black liberation were these existential moments of how can we win when there's all these other problems tied together, poverty and other things. As a liberal or in liberal trans organizing spaces, that was an issue that frequently came up as well. You see people being killed. Like we know that on the Trans Day of Remembrance, we're frequently talking about Black trans women in the U.S. And frequently sex workers. And, that's not an accident. Liberal spaces tend to act like there's some mysterious reason for this when we know it's really the intersections of various kinds of oppressions. And you see these people get killed and then misgendered in the news, and you want to do something about it. But how do you liberate trans people, including all trans people, when you have to also end Black oppression and poverty? That's where liberal organizers run into their existential moment. And a lot of them quit at that point. Some of them choose
Thank
smaller
you, Dub.
things to
Appreciate
focus
you.
on and live in that. Some of them become socialists. that's where I ran into socialist reading. Like
Really?
Black liberation organizing.
funny.
That's the first time I encountered. Well, there is an explanation, right? There are ways to approach it. That's not an existential moment for socialists. That's everyday organizing for socialists. We know the answer to that stuff. One of the references I use a lot in
Maybe I should. Should I roll out my trans Jesus that I made a while back? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Hang on. Does anyone want to see my trans Jesus? I thought this was gonna piss off the Christians way more than it did. Where's my trans Jesus? Hang on. I didn't make a big deal out of it. It was just something I did for fun. We're going to do an Easter Sunday special with trans Jesus from the Unwoke art store. I got to try again though. Maybe I should try again. Maybe because I've gotten better at doing AI art since I made the original trans Jesus. What do you guys think? Yeah, little freaky. Anyway, maybe we'll make some trans Jesus t-shirts for Easter. That'll get me canceled by the Christians. Something fierce.
Talking about this, I try to compare it to the 70s. This very revolutionary moment where you had a lot of capitalists and fascists afraid of what the kids were doing, right? But what you saw were a lot of socialists. It's not always well documented in the history books, particularly the LGBT mainstream history books, that a lot of this stuff was being led by socialists, but it was, right? And they worked together. The Black Panthers would be bodyguards for feminist events. Queer liberation socialists would go and work with unions. We saw these efforts being tied together and working together because they had a common language, they had a common understanding. They were comrades, and they knew they were in the same
drink
fight. Even if they were focusing on different parts of it, they were in the same fight. After that, suddenly there was this idea being promulgated that it's unprofessional to somehow focus on or care about multiple topics at the same time. And I always thought the word professional there was a very operative word about who was pushing that idea. We have to care about multiple things, right? I saw in an article recently on a completely different topic, a leading thinker dropping that Marxism is an economic theory, which sounds
here we go.
fairly benevolent. I heard it a lot as a young adult. When I would get invited to socialist events as a young adult, mostly in like philosophy department stuff, right? What I would hear is that like gay liberation was Western decadence, and it wasn't really part of the fight. I think sometimes you hear now people saying it's a second tier issue or some variation.
Well, hang on. Dragon Tail says, overwhelmingly passed on the 2023 National DSA Convention this past August is an amendment, act like an independent party. What this means is, essentially what this means is that the DSA isn't going to run people as Democrats anymore. They're going to kind of like try to like split from any direct association with the Democratic Party and run their own candidates. And that's primarily a response to the fact that all these socialist organizations were ragging on them for saying, you're too close to the Democratic Party, you're too close to capitalism, that sort of thing.
Thereof, which is, it's a certain level of understanding of what's going on, and in certain ways, in that we have to fight an economic battle. There's at least a moment of truth there, right? This is ultimately an economic battle that we're facing, but Marx didn't write about economic issues because he arbitrarily dreamed up a new economic theory. He investigated economics because he saw what was happening around him and cared about it. We can care about it too. The analogy that I like to use is if you imagine a circus tent, one of those really big tents that has a huge main tent pole in the center and a lot of little tent poles around it holding it up. If you imagine the economic oppression of capitalism as the main tent pole, you can see.
Hang on, I just want to do a quick reminder over to folks on Rumble, and I appreciate everyone on Rumble who's watching right now, but I just want to do a quick reminder that we do not debunk on Socialism Saturday. We do not do this owning the lib bullshit. This is about learning what they believe, learning what their perspective is. If you're doing the owning the lib bullshit, that's not going to work out well for you. I don't want to see it. If you have questions about what they mean or why they do something the way they do, you're more than welcome to ask, but no more debunking, please. I appreciate it.
All these other oppressions as the surrounding tent poles holding up the edges and supporting the main one and making it an actual tent. We can, with sufficient force, batter the main tent pole and take the tent down. It's certainly possible. But what's a lot easier is to start rocking all the tent poles like they did in the 70s. And then these various things that support capitalism pull against each other and work against each other.
Okay, what Emma is doing right now is describing explicitly why socialists have like 19 different words that all mean capitalism. And I was just asked this yesterday. Carlin, if socialists mean capitalism, then why don't they say capitalism? Well, they have all sorts of different words that, first of all, they do say capitalism. You've already heard them say capitalism in the course of this presentation, but they have multiple different words to describe different aspects of capitalism. Whiteness is what they use to attack capitalism on the basis of race. The patriarchy and the gender binary is what they use to attack capitalism on the basis of gender. When they're talking about abolish the nuclear family, that is an attack on capitalism. When they're talking about parental rights, that is an attack on capitalism. When they're talking about abolish or defund the police, that is an attack on capitalism. When they're talking about colonization, colonialism, decolonization, all those words mean capitalism. When they're talking about queer and queer liberation, that means to liberate from capitalism. What they're doing is they're attacking capitalism from multiple different angles. They're not just attacking it from one. They're not just going head on. And this makes sense, right? The smartest way to attack an enemy is not to go right up and punch the enemy in the face. First of all, the enemy is going to see you coming, right? If you just walk up to someone and like punch them in the face, they're going to see you coming. What you want to do is come up behind them or get some friends to hit them from the side, and then you're getting the enemy from multiple different angles. That's exactly what they're doing with capitalism. Let me just rewind this so you guys can hear it again, because they're explicitly explaining this. Okay, Word Führer over on Rumble. No, it is not an attack on white Western society. That is conservative right-wing bullshit. That is not real. That is not grounded in reality. If you're not going to be a productive part of this experience, bro, you're welcome to GTFO and go somewhere else. This is not an attack on white Western culture. Anyone who tells you it is trying to sell you a narrative to get you on their political side that is grounded in bullshit. Let's listen. Let's listen to an actual socialist explain what they believe.
And with sufficient force, batter the main tent pole and take the tent down. It's certainly possible. But what's a lot easier is to start rocking all the tent poles like they did in the 70s. And then these various things that support capitalism pull against each other and work against each other. And it takes a lot less force and a lot less effort. It's to our benefit and to everyone's benefit to pull these issues back into mainstream socialism where they belong, where there are trained leaders and organizers with good socialist analysis of what's happening.
What Emma just said, it is to everyone's benefit to pull queer issues and trans issues back into mainstream socialism. What does that mean? It means what Emma's going at right now is the Bolsheviks, because the Bolsheviks are more like the economic Marxists, and the Bolsheviks do not necessarily embrace all of the queer Marxism stuff, and they're the ones that Emma's referring to when she says mainstream socialism. And what Emma's saying is it's to our benefit to join forces, because we're all attacking capitalism. We're attacking capitalism from different angles. And so we should really all work together to make sure we're attacking capitalism from as many angles as possible. And what they're actually trying to do, and we talked about this in relation to the Revolutionary Communist Party, what they're actually trying to do is the queer Marxists are going to try to co-opt the Bolsheviks, essentially. That's what's going to happen. You know, I recently, a couple weeks ago, got into a little bit of a spat with no, I'm not. This is merely a 4% sour beer, a red raspberry lemonade sour beer, no vodka, Josh Randall, but I appreciate the super chat. I got into a Twitter spat with a conservative influencer that you guys would know the name of if I said their name. And they recently wrote a book all about Maoist China and how America is trying to do cultural revolution in Maoist China. And I was trying to tell this person that that the Bolsheviks, the Revolutionary Communist Party, are dangerous. And she was like, no, Carlin, the Bolsheviks are not dangerous. Only the cultural Marxists are dangerous. And I said, Z, don't you think that the queer Marxists are going to try to co-opt any Revolutionary Communist Party? And she, of course, didn't answer. And then she gave me some excuse because she's been co-opted by the conservative machine. And then she said, well, we really agree. And I said, no, we don't agree at all. If you don't think that the Bolsheviks are dangerous and you don't think that they're going to get co-opted by the queer Marxists, we are actually in vehement disagreement. Well, look what happened. 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after that Twitter spat, what are we seeing the socialists saying? They're talking about the queer Marxists co-opting the economic Marxists. And they're saying we should just all work together because we need to attack capitalism from as many angles as possible. It's almost like when you stop listening to what James Lindsay says and you start listening to what actual socialists say, it's almost like they say the quiet part out loud. But I'm not bitter or anything. I'm not bitter. Well, yeah, China was influenced by the Bolsheviks as well, which they also don't like to admit, but whatever.
And I guess I'll let it go there. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks to all three of you for giving us these ideas to lead us off, kick us off. So I have some pre-planned discussion questions. I figure I can put a few of these out there. I know that already folks have connected and discuss these issues a little bit. So there might be a little bit of overlap. But now I think is our opportunity to dive in a little bit. So I'll put the questions out there. Folks, the three of you, as you feel so moved to answer them, can come off and we'll have a little bit of a discussion. We'll keep this going for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for Q&A. And just once again, folks in the audience, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Any provocative thing that comes up as we're having this conversation, that's the spot to put it so it doesn't float away. So this is to kind of continue what Emma was discussing a little bit, but I'm curious, how do you all think Marxism and the struggle for clear liberation interacts? Do they have separate goals and ideologies? Do they support one another?
This guy needs to get his own
Or are
office
they
or something,
more
bro.
intimately connected in some way? All three of you have touched on that a little bit, but I was hoping we could bring that out.
But he's a worker, so he has to present in a coffee shop.
Should we just go in the same order, guys?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll start this by saying that the way that I see Marxism and have come to understand it through like reading and like other people, helping me read very dense content, is that it is, to me, Marxism is more about like an analysis. And
I want to just take a moment to answer World Fuhrer's question over on Rumble. Have you read Harry Wanton? That's me listening. Okay, so let me be very clear about my methodology, guys. How I learn about this stuff is I watch people teaching it in the real world. The only content that I consume is not propaganda content from the right, is not propaganda content from conservatives, is certainly not propaganda content from the dissident right. The only content that I consume and factor into my analysis are real far-left activists teaching their ideas in the real world in their own spaces. So what that means is I watch their meetings, I watch their classes, I go to their conferences, I hear how they are teaching the ideas to each other, and I promise you, dissident right-wingers, the things that they're saying to each other in their private spaces is much different than what you think they believe. So I don't really give a fuck what Harry Wanton did in the early 1900s. That is not a factor in my analysis. I look at what's going on in the real world, in the real United States right now. If you want someone that's going to do a historical analysis into all your favorite authors to advance some sort of like neo-Nazi bullshit, I am not your girl. We watch real socialists in the real world that are operating right now. And the reason that we do that is this is what is impacting people's normal lives right now. And you can keep arguing with me all you want. I don't give a flying F. I don't know what is confusing about this to you. What is confusing about the idea that I am observing and doing analysis on real socialists in the real world right now? Not 100 years ago. In the real world right now. Let's continue.
Then about like specific prescriptions or goals, which I think have a fundamentally moral component to them. Marxism I see as a tool to...
Well, bro, you also think this is about destroying white Western society, which it is not. So no, world viewer, I am not going to listen to your perspective on this, because anyone that comes in here and says that this is about destroying white Western society, I know where that's coming from, bro. I know where you're getting your ideas from. I've spent the better part of the last week looking at those ideas too, and they're not fucking accurate. It is not an accurate interpretation of what is going on right now. And so you can have all the hissy fit you want about this. We are looking at what is going on in the real world right now. Not advancing your fucking dissident right-wing propaganda bullshit.
Understand power. Like Emma was saying, that it's often taught as an economic sort of ideology or analysis. I think even deeper than that, it's one about power. Like it quantifies money as like a way of storing, transmitting, et cetera, power. And so I think that so often, I mean, this is the clearest in financial stuff. If you look at how, like, the United States,
3 out of 4 presenters we're watching right now are literally white. And I still have fucking, like, far-right assholes coming into my chat going, they want to destroy white people. They don't want to destroy white people. If they wanted to destroy white people, then none of their presenters would be fucking white.
treasury, or how, like, the people who run global banks and things like that are talking about how they are setting up the economy to advantage capitalists and disadvantage the working class. They themselves are using Marxist analysis because it's a fundamentally, like, accurate, and it's the best sort of, like, thought technology that we've developed for understanding how power and economy interact in the world. And so
arguments from the far right would be so much more effective if they would just drop their incessant fucking obsession with skin color. It's like, we watched a presentation yesterday for Happy Hour in which they talked about redefining anti-Semitism to apply to Black and brown immigrants, even if they're not Jewish. And it's like, you see something like that and you're like, yeah, okay, I can wrap my head around that. That is actually against white people. They are redefining the term anti-Semitism to include attacks on anyone who's not white. That is a valid bone of contention. That is a valid way that they are explicitly singling out white people, okay? But then I have all these conversations with people where they just want to, like, they hate white people. They want to destroy white people. They hate us. They want to destroy us. It's like, bro, like, most of the socialists that we watch are fucking white. It doesn't make any sense. It's like they've got these blinders up and it's so infuriating. And this focus on white people, 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 it usurps every other thing. They have no idea the attacks that are going on parental rights, and they don't give a fuck because white people, white people, white people, white people, white people. Guess what? White people are going to lose their fucking kids to this bullshit because of the attacks on parental rights, and you guys don't even fucking see it because you're going white people, white people, white people, white people, white people, white people, white people. It's fucking infuriating. It is the constant and perpetual distraction that is going to lead to the far left actually winning a lot sooner and a lot more effectively than any of those idiots want. And it's like they claim to be against them, and then they're like, they're all Jewish. Okay, fine. Well, if you really think that all these people are Jewish, then why wouldn't you want to fight back against them more effectively? Then why would you constantly be trying to help them by allowing yourself to be distracted by something that isn't real just because it's all over your goddamn propaganda? It makes no fucking sense at all. And I can't even have a rational conversation with anyone about this where I can concede. Yesterday, we saw a presentation where they're defining anti-Semitism to be anything that's against Black and brown people, even if those Black and brown people aren't Jewish. I can't even fucking concede that point. Because if I do, then the entire conversation is going to be about they hate white people. They want to destroy white people. They hate white people. They want to destroy white people. Anti-white, 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 anti-white. It's like, fuck me. Shut up. In the meantime, we're not paying attention to attacks on parental rights. We're not paying attention to attacks on property. They don't even know that these attacks on parental rights, the nuclear family, the gender binary, all this stuff about queering kids in school, they have no fucking idea that this is all an attack on capitalism, which is private property, and they don't fucking care because they don't like capitalism either. But they refuse to acknowledge the definition of capitalism that they're using, which is fundamentally different than their definition. It's like... And all their kids are going to end up all their kids are going to end up getting taken away and queered by the schools while they're still complaining about how mean they are to white people. And this is why I don't care if people suffer anymore when they don't pay attention. It's like you allowed yourself to be distracted. You allowed yourself to be obsessed over skin color. You allowed yourself to be sucked in by right-wing propaganda that was not grounded into reality. You made every single fucking excuse in the fucking book for why you didn't want to give up your dream of being a white fucking victim of the world. And then you're surprised when they still kicked your ass up and down the playing field. Well, you weren't hinged into reality, bro. I'm sorry. And then they go, you're fat and ugly. It's like, fuck you, man. Anyway, sorry to rant. Let's keep going.
I see the struggle for queer liberation as like best equipped to understand its own position in society, understand our oppression as queer people, understand that the solutions go beyond sort of like liberal advocacy and like bodies and spaces stuff, as requiring Marxism as an analysis of power in order to equip ourselves to organize for our liberation and to understand how our oppression intersects with other forms of oppression, and understand that, for example, like it's not a coincidence that at the same, I mentioned on the trans rights and bodily autonomy kickoff call where we had a very famous trans legislator named Zoe Zephyr there, who was kicked out of Montana's state legislature by Republicans last year, that it's not a coincidence that at the same time that was happening in Tennessee, they were removing a Black legislator from that legislature for advocating for his children and his community's children.
Here we go. Here we go. White replacement is the biggest problem in the world right now. Cry harder, bro. Cry harder. And by the way, you're probably a 15-year-old in your mom's fucking basement. And if you ever want to get married and have kids, you better start focusing in on something that matters. Because by the time you actually find a woman to marry you, which I dare say will probably take a long ass time, they're going to take away your ability to have parental rights at all. And your kids are going to belong to the state. And you're still going to be reading about white fucking replacement theory.
Like where Zoe Zephyr was advocating for her community's children. It's not a coincidence that right now, as the state of Texas is trying to investigate a trans rights organization and like get them to give up their membership list so they can investigate trans parents for their children, that the legal construct that organization is using to defend itself is the legal precedent for it was established when the radical right tried to subpoena the NAACP's membership list during the civil rights movement. It's not a coincidence that, as Emma was saying, that in hate crimes against trans people, 80% of those are specifically against Black transgender women. And the existing sort of like very like vibey liberal analysis of like, we should love everybody, that doesn't really fully answer the question of why are these forms of oppression intersectional? Why do, when you live in a so-called safe state for trans people where you have like social and medical rights, why is it still that trans people are 8 times more likely to be homeless than people who aren't trans? And from how I see it, a Marxist analysis of our economy and fundamentally of how power is arranged in society is the only way to accurately and fully link those things and understand the solving of all those problems as fundamentally interconnected.
They legitimately think that white people own capitalism. They legitimately fucking do. It's goddamn infuriating. And it's like, again, it's like one of those things. It's like, all right, I'm going to stop working out my feelings, I promise. But like, they are more committed to seeing themselves as victims of the world than they are in actually solving the problem. It's like these people claim, I'm talking about like the dissident right, like these people claim all the socialists we watch are Jewish. Okay, fine. Let's just pretend that that's true for half a second. Let's just, let's enter the realm of fantasy land where that's true, even though it's not. If all of them are Jewish, then don't you actually want to know how to beat them? Then don't you actually want to know how they're winning? Then don't you actually want to be able to identify the specific people and the specific organizations that are pushing the ideology without just saying, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews? Don't you actually want to do anything fucking productive? No, they don't. They don't. They don't want to do anything productive at all. They just want to read about fucking white people, and it's like, all right, I'm going to stop working out my feelings. Let's listen.
Thanks, Genevieve. Rashad or Emma, would either of you like to take a stab at this one?
Thanks for kicking us off, Jen. Lots of themes agree with there, and would definitely want to build on. The one maybe where I think we may diverge a little bit is in terms of the idea of like goals, and does it have like do each ideology have like a prescriptive set of what those goals or what that looks like? And I think what is common between the two is like the desire to like eliminate certain conditions that give rise to the oppression that each system seeks to combat and poses. So whether that's right, queer liberation seeking to eliminate the conditions.
See, and now we've got the typical. I can't even speak here. I'm gonna be in trouble. No, bro. No. You are not a fucking victim of the fucking world. You guys are the one who want men to run everything because you guys think that if white men run the world, then everything's going to be fine because white men are better equipped than anyone else to run the world. And yet you come here and you're like, I am a poor victim of the world and everyone hates me and everyone wants to destroy me. Do you like real leaders don't do that shit? Real leaders don't walk into a room and go, I am a poor victim of the world and everyone hates me and everyone wants to destroy me. It's so fucking off-putting. Like, if you want to be in charge, then man up, put on your fucking big boy pants, and act like an actual man. Why is it that I'm more masculine than most of you guys?
Three types of conditions, right? Social, political, and economic conditions that give rise to queer oppression, and Marxism, right, seeking to eliminate, all social, political, and economic conditions that give rise to worker oppression, alienation, exploitation, etc.
I'm literally more angry at the far right now than I am at the goddamn socialists. And that's a fucking problem. You want to know why? Because the socialists are pushing forward and doing exactly what they're saying they're going to do. And eventually they're going to win and they're going to abolish the United States government and they're going to take over everything. And when they do, the fucking far right, who maybe could have actually thrown sand in their gears, who maybe could have actually done something productive with their energy to turn them back, are going to be like, they hate white people, 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 we're poor white victims of the world. And it's like, bro, the reason these people are winning is because they are 100% focused on the fucking goal while you guys are complaining about being white fucking victims of the world. They're winning because you are allowing them to with your own fecklessness. Because it's more important to you to be an oppressed victim. It's like you're no different than the fucking left. Thank you, Rottweiler. What do you expect from people who are desperate for a race war? They think they're going to fight and win because they play Call of Duty and do other things all day. Exactly. And now we have World Fuhrer over on Rumble complaining, you haven't read that random guy from the early 1900s like I told you to. Bro, did I not explicitly explain my methodology? Oh, I did? Go away. Goodbye. You're now banned for this live stream. Me explaining my methodology. I watch Real Socialists in the Real World today. That is my methodology. dissident right-wingers. Why won't you read this paper from the early 1900s? Because that's not in my methodology. Why can't you? This is stupid. Why can't you? White people are victims of the world. My fucking God. I need more beer. Obviously, I need more beer. Yeah, it's one of those Saturdays.
Etc. So I think that focus on eliminating the conditions that give rise to the systems, both whether it be social hierarchy or whether it be economic modes of production, are both innately tied to the goal of eliminating certain conditions and creating a new set of conditions that will give rise to a new set of outcomes, right? What would it take for queer oppression to not be the dominant part of the contradiction, but right, queer liberation to remain dominant and to like stay dominant? What would it take for working class rule to not be, in a position of not being the rulers of society? What would it take for us to maintain and stay rulers of those society? So again, answering those questions and thinking about conditions, both social, economic, and political, I think are two pretty similar things there. Secondly, both in terms of modes of analysis really get at like the idea of nothing being fixed, right? Whether it's someone's body and gender and sexuality, and not thinking of the static or what is like socially mandated of us, for example, as like fixed or what has to be, for example, right? Queer theory challenges that. Marxist theory challenges that as well. So I think those are pretty similar. And I've personally found queer theory useful in thinking about Marxism because instead of trying to find I'm this type of Marxist or that type of Marxist, I've joked in the past and said I think my Marxism has gotten way more non-binary because it allows me to look at the entire Marxist tradition, before the Soviet Union, but it also allows me to look at the entire Marxist tradition, post the Soviet Union as well, and conflicting traditions within things that maybe I used to say, oh, I'm a Marxist Leninist, and so I disagree with, this Trotskyist thought or something like that. But queering up my Marxism.
They're talking about co-opting again. That's all co-opting. Saying that Marxism is non-binary means basically that you don't have to ascribe to like one specific tradition to like be a Marxist. So they're talking about co-opting again.
A bit has allowed me to really soak in and use our entire Marxist tradition.
Oh, that was fun, Rashad. Thank you. Like one thing I would start off with is just pointing out that at the time of the Soviet Revolution, one of the things that happened immediately was this sudden queer liberation, this sudden proliferation of queer rights. You had rights to marriage. Suddenly there were people doing trans surgeries. We've lost a lot of the records of this stuff, and
thank you, Freedom. Appreciate it.
That later on in the Soviet system, things changed. But the people of the revolution understood queer liberation to be part of the event. So, I mean, if you want to deny that, go ahead. One of the other things I would say, and I would encourage you not to cite this in academic circles because I'm not enough of a historian to really justify it. But if you look at the events of like World War II era, we're basically told that the gay community developed because gay guys suddenly got together in the army and decided it'd be better if they lived closer to each other, and started living in San Francisco, and gay community grew from there. If you look at the Communist Party newsletters before that, the Communist Party was already debating queer rights for years.
See, and this is the part where the dissident right could actually make progress with some of their arguments when they're talking about communists back before World War II. We're trying to advance queer rights. We're trying to advance trans stuff. We're doing all of this stuff. That was why they were burning the books in Germany in the first place. There are fair points to be made from the dissident right. Here's my biggest issue with this. There are fair points to be made from the dissident right, but you can't have a conversation about that, because always and inevitably where that conversation is going to go is white people are the poor victims of the world. It's just like any sort of like rationality and nuance is just drowned out by the skin color victimhood status.
Been for years. We're at least as good on it as we are now, other than maybe, like everybody else, they didn't know about the existence of trans people in particular. But to be fair, I think it was probably lack of knowledge. I suspect, and this is where you should be careful who you discuss it around if you don't want to be told you're wrong. I suspect that the members of the Communist Party, who were then interacting with all the other gay people in the army, who taught them what it was like to be open and free at a time while we were treating the Soviets as friends rather than enemies, started the gay community. I think the very origin of the gay community in the US owes itself to the Communist Party. Certainly,
what Emma just said aligns perfectly with the dissident right narrative about where all this stuff came from. What did she just say? The gay community in the US owes its existence to the Communist Party in Germany in the 30s. But we can't even have that fucking conversation because inevitably it's going to go off the goddamn crazy train and descend into the land of retardia. Not in Germany, in the Soviet Union, rather. Sorry, my bad.
While we were treating the Soviets as friends rather than enemies, started the gay community. I think the very origin of the gay community in the US owes itself to the Communist Party. Certainly the active queer liberation movement of the 70s owes itself to socialist organizers. If you look at the leaders for decades there, they were socialists.
Actually, I want to get that again. So now Emma has gone from saying that the gay communities, the queer communities in the United States today owe their existence to queer communities in Soviet Russia in the 30s. And now they're saying that the gay community also owes its existence to socialist activism in like the 60s and the 70s.
What it was like to be open and free at a time while we were treating the Soviets as friends rather than enemies, started the gay community. I think the very origin of the gay community in the US owes itself to the Communist Party. Certainly the active queer liberation movement of the 70s owes itself to socialist organizers. If you look at the leaders for decades there, they were socialists. A lot of times in queer history or LGBT mainstream history, their socialist ties aren't mentioned, but you can find it if you look for it. More what I would say is socialist Marxists have often mentioned that American capitalism had special features and was difficult to dismantle because of these special features. And one of the most obvious of the special features was racism. You could split the community, you could split people along.
American capitalism had the special feature of racism. Pop quiz for the chat. Why did Emma just say that American capitalism had the special feature of racism? What does that mean? What is that a reference to? What does it mean that American capitalism had the special feature of racism? Capitalism is what caused slavery in the United States. Capitalism is what caused slavery. Why did capitalism cause slavery? Because slavery was the ownership of individuals as private property. That's what whiteness means. When they're saying whiteness and white supremacy, they're not referring to your skin color. I'm sorry, dissident right-wingers, but they're just not. That's just the truth. They're referring to capitalism because capitalism created the institution of slavery, which is the ownership of people as private property. The institution of slavery created systemic or institutional racism. In 2020, the left changed the dictionary definition of racism to include systemic or institutional racism, specifically because they wanted to be able to refer to the system that upholds capitalism, or excuse me, the system that upholds racism. That system is capitalism. Does everyone understand that? They believe that systemic racism, which is the predominant form of racism that they're talking about in America, was created due to slavery, which was the ownership of people as private property. And the only way to abolish the impacts of systemic racism is to get rid of the institution that upholds racism, the system that upholds racism, and that system is capitalism. That's what they're saying when Emma says that American capitalism has a special feature and that's racism. That's because they believe that capitalism perpetuates racism. Does everyone understand? Are there any questions about this? This is the hardest concept for people to wrap their heads around. And it would be really nice if we could have a conversation about this, dissident right-wingers, without you losing your mind and saying you're white victims of the world. It'd be really nice.
For it. More what I would say is socialist Marxists have often mentioned that American capitalism had special features and was difficult to dismantle because of these special features. And one of the most obvious of the special features was racism. You could split the community, you could split people along the lines of race. And then since you could oppress some people a lot, you could oppress others as well. The queer oppression has played a similar role in American capitalism. It's not well understood in that respect, but it's also an important part of separating the communities, separating people, and sustaining capitalism. One of my personal theories is that if you imagine a socialist revolution for tomorrow that leaves behind some form of oppression, even if it's not directly capitalist oppression, economic oppression, if it's racist oppression, if it's oppression of women or queer people or disabled people, as long as you can justifiably and publicly oppress some people, you will wind up back with a capitalist system of oppression. That's my answer, Luke. You can take it back.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to ask one more, I don't know if abstract is the right word, but one more broad question before I bring it into DSA and our political moment, because I do really want to hear you all speak to that. So in what ways have what I'll term here liberal approaches led the fight for queer liberation astray? And what benefits would socialist approaches offer?
Notice they're differentiating between liberal and
This is a really good
socialist.
question. I'm going to take a very intentionally sort of like generous angle on this, because I feel like I owe my own existence to sort of like queer rights activist people, and many of whom were socialists, but existed and organized in a time where they didn't have the benefit that we do today of like cultural validity of democratic socialism, the existence of DSA, et cetera. I view it less as like that liberal approaches sort of led the movement astray. I do agree that the movement hasn't been explicitly socialist for a very long time. It used to be explicitly like socialist and communist, and in places where there have been like dramatic liberation of queer people, it has been by socialist and communist movements. But in recent history, especially like in America, that hasn't been the case. And I view it sort of as there's like a chicken and egg to the liberalization of queer rights, and to the like astrayness or suppression of the movement in general and of socialist organizing in the United States. The way that I choose to look at it, so that I don't get mad at anybody that's sort of within the movement, is that for many decades, like queer people have had to continue struggling for our liberation in order to like save our own lives and the lives of people we love under political circumstances where a large mass socialist organization was not sort of like viable in the way that it is today, due to all sorts of kinds of suppression, due to like lasting culture.
Why is a mass socialist movement viable today? That's what they seem to think. They have finally reached the point where a mass socialist movement is viable. It's a funny thing, isn't it, that this Revolutionary Communist Party of America that has organizations in over 30 cities just sprung up out of nowhere saying, we finally think that a communist movement in the United States is valuable. And now we're hearing from the DSA, which apparently has had some vote to move farther right than they were a couple months ago. And they're saying a socialist like uprising in America is possible. I wonder why that's happening.
Cultural fear over the United States government's horrific and violent suppression of the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, and like intentional erasure of the socialist characteristics of those movements. And so the question though is like, the way that I'll interpret it is like, what are the limitations of the liberal approach to fighting for queer liberation? And I think that the core limitation is, like I said before, if you live in a safe state, I live in New York, where trans people have pretty decent social and medical rights. There are some things we could improve. But for the people who like track national trans bills, they're annoyed with New York because all of their automatic alert systems put like every single bill that happens in New York into it, because every single one talks about gender identity, specifically preventing discrimination against it. And like, as annoying as that is, it's also because of how far we've come on the social rights and kind of like the liberal angle of this in New York. But again, trans people here are 8 times more likely than cis people to experience homelessness. Like we don't have universal access to healthcare. So people who are poor and trans people are more likely to be poor, don't have access to healthcare that ostensibly like the social rights about non-discrimination are supposed to grant us, but we still have economic oppression and inequality under capitalism that fundamentally like gates our community from accessing those things. And So like that's the limitation to me, is that without understanding the like economic liberation angle of it, like the power to seek healthcare is economic. The power to have housing is economic. Like, and you can guarantee non-discrimination, but if you don't fix economic inequality, trans people don't have access to these things. And it's also like a major obstacle for movements for socialism, for movements for like identity-based liberation in America has been a lack of intersectionality,
Identity-based
so to
liberation from
that
capitalism.
you can't have a mass political movement that isn't multiracial. You can't have a mass political movement that doesn't include queer people. Like if you recreate these forms of oppression, like sort of as Emma said, you're like, it's a tool to get us to oppress ourselves. And so like breaking that ceiling and connecting the fight for queer liberation to broader struggles for economic liberation, for racial liberation, et cetera, like is the only way that these things themselves can advance, is by being part of something together, which is sort of how socialists look at all sort of like organizing, is that we're stronger together. We only have this mass collective power if we build it together.
Thanks, Genevieve. Rashad, I don't know if you want to take this one.
Yeah. So building on what Jen said, I really like how Jen mentioned like the progress that like liberal, like pro-queer movements have gotten us, and I think like where those gains have gone in terms of like the social wins and like a kind of a mass cultural change and benefit. Like socialist job is to finish the job when it comes to the economic angles of it and the political angles of it as well. And borrowing from Emma, I'll use some parallels to like the Black liberation movement and national liberation movements, for example. And I think about Frantz Fanon's conception of cultural nationalism, right, versus revolutionary nationalism. And did the social inclusion or social inequality that dropped, that either led to the formerly like nationally like oppressed, or whether racially oppressed in the U.S. or queer people who are oppressed, did it lead to a complete transformation of the economic and political system that gave rise to that oppression, or did it just put queer people in high places, Black people in high places, right? The former colonized in high places. And I think that's where liberalism has gotten us, because it was meant to reconstitute the political and economic systems that gave rise to that oppression and the need for that oppression in the first place, right? It's how, in the same vein, you got the first Black president dropping some of the most bombs on the nation that he was supposed to be from, played it up that he was from Kenya, and dropped the most bombs on Africa. AFRICOM got ramped up.
Nationalism is a reference to borders. It's also a reference to like one succinct like hegemonic culture. Thanks, Tate, for the super chat. Appreciate it.
Example, I was just in San Francisco for the MPC meeting, and talking to them and hearing what they deal with is a lot of cops with pride flags, right? You look at the try to ramp up to demonize the Palestinian liberation movement, right? And you see this like oh, savages and different things like that. They don't believe in social Western values of queer people and queer expression and equality in that regard, right? Used to justify imperialism, used to again continue to like reconstitute this state that it's our job as socialists is to finish the job and transform and say, no, we are in opposition to the state and the political and economic system that gave rise to this oppression in the first place. No matter if it's queer oppression, national oppression, or racial oppression, it's our job to finish the job when the liberals don't. Even if they take us far socially, it's us to take the economic fight, and it's up to us to take the political fight.
So I have been organizing in liberal queer activist spaces. A lot of what I saw, and I will probably should say, I do respect all the gains that have come over the years, and what people have done and what people have sacrificed, and the unpaid work that they put in.
The unpaid emotional labor.
And one of the lessons of my life has been about terminology. So I will say that when I'm using the word liberal, part of what is inherent in it to me, which really ruins the surprise and the point I wanted to make later, part of what's embedded in the word liberal for me is an acceptance that some people are better than others. And that's the point I'm going to
Still
drag
hierarchies and
through
liberalism.
this. What I have seen in liberal organizing is LG organizations, or at best LGB organizations, actively organizing against trans rights, right? LGBT organizations organizing against prisoners' rights, Black rights, or ignoring it, right? This lack of understanding of the intersectionality of it. But
Beth, the Unwoke Roundup email comes out on Sunday, not Saturday, and so the new email will come out tomorrow with the correct links. I did not send one out last week because I was otherwise occupied. It's the first time in over a year I haven't sent one out, but I think people understand why I didn't. But there's no more links that you need for this week that aren't going to come out tomorrow. So those links will come out tomorrow.
More insidiously, the idea that, like I said, some people are more deserving than others. And that's really the point I want to start hammering on now, is that to me, liberal organizing is still this kind of top down, follow your leaders, follow the people that know best. We're not organizing people. We're going to tell you what to do, and you can contribute money to us because we want to live well while we're doing this stuff. And you can write the letters and you can do the work, but let us just make the decisions because we know better. And that to me is not queer organizing. So I think that gets to what I maybe make some people mad, but what I would want to say about it.
Thank you. So before we get to our audience Q&A, and thank you folks who have been putting Q&A comments in, it's going to be an awesome part of it. I want to kind of combine these last two questions. So the first part of the question being, why do you think now is the time for DSA to directly enter the fight for queer liberation?
That's a good question.
The second part being, if you have any comment regarding the current electoral season and the struggle for queer liberation. So I'm imagining that there might be something within the current electoral zeitgeist, so to speak, that would necessitate DSA being involved. So I wanted to combine those two a little bit for folks. And yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I was typing in the chat a reply to Emma.
Oh, no worries. No worries, Genevieve. No worries. So why do we think that now is the time for DSA to fight for queer liberation? And at the same time, if you could comment a little bit on the current electoral season and the struggle for queer liberation.
I mean, now is the time for DSA. DSA members have been involved in queer rights and bodily autonomy and so on work, you know, for as long as there have been DSA members. And socialists and communists have been a part of struggles for women's liberation, for queer.
Beth, the links come out tomorrow. There's nothing to do right now.
Queer liberation, etc., for as long as we've had these political movements. So it's not now that like DSA is getting involved in this stuff. Like we, you know, at the launch of our trans rights and bodily autonomy thing, a lot of it was people presenting the stuff they've already done. So we have been here, but now is the time for DSA to start diverting our national like resources towards it in a way that we haven't before. because the far right's attacks on these liberties are dramatically ramping up. And for several years, the right has invested more and more and more each year at the national and state levels in these political attacks. And I have all of my theories that I could probably spend a long time saying about why that is. The short version of it is that I think it's an attack on the American public's capacity for solidarity, in that like the goal is to demonize a very small proportion of the population, and in the process like ramp up these sort of like, I don't invoke this lightly, but like similar like Nazistic like blood libel-y things about like targeting children and doing sort of clandestine rituals against them and stuff like that. But they're doing that because the goal is to get the American public to hate about 1% of its population into extinction, and then build on that from there to like turn that same energy towards larger minorities of people. And that campaign is ramping up and getting really aggressive. And DSA is also at a point where like DSA has about 80,000 members spread across a little over 175 chapters in 48 states. And no other organization that's working on trans rights has anything close to that. And whenever like I, as somebody who's like coordinating this work nationally, meet with other national organizations, it's the first thing I say is that this is what we have. This is what we can contribute to the space that nobody else is doing. Like, you've been doing this for a long time. Please like send us information. Like if you are like, oh, this thing is happening in this state and this state legislator needs to be targeted, but all I have is like researchers and lobbyists. We have people. And we're at a point in American history where like what is needed to deal with this is people. Like just doing lobbying and like advocacy isn't enough. And other people who are working on this issue recognize that too. And the bottleneck is not like how much people care about it. It's how organized and mobilized the movement to defend and advance trans rights and bodily autonomy is. And also like DSA, I don't know, I don't have data to support this, but I think that of all the sort of like big multi-issue organizations in the country, I think we're the most proportionally trans. That's my anecdotal observation. And so, yeah, it's become the front lines of like the fascist right's attack on the American public's like conscious capacity for solidarity. And that matters for all of the other socialist work we want to do.
Yep.
And so if we want to defend that capacity for solidarity, this is like the battlefield that fight is happening on. And if we don't
Naptown,
show
cut the
up, we're
bullshit,
gonna get
please.
beaten.
Thanks, Genevieve. I'll turn it on over to you, Rashad.
All right. I want everyone to be focused on the presentation. No more paying attention to nonsense and bullshit in the chat. I don't want any more distractions in the fucking chat. Everyone pay attention to what we're actually watching, please.
Yeah, thanks for kicking us off, Jen. And you talked about the DSA difference and less of like what we can do externally. I'll more focus on like the DSA difference of how did we even get to trans rights and bodily autonomy being at the front lines and a priority of our organization is because we have those democratic processes, right, in a convention as like
Socialist.
our highest governing body, to where members said we want this to be the top fight that we take, and now they are seeing their organization go full throttle. Thanks to the leadership of all three of us, like on this call, for example. And I think that's such a critical tie to the elections. Show that we are such an alternative to the Democratic Party, right? A party that the rank and file supporter or voter has absolutely no power over, right? There are plenty of people who have voted for Democrats in the last however many federal elections who are completely fed up with the lack of a fight that we have seen around, right, trans rights and bodily autonomy more broadly, for example, right? DSA can be an organization that like our members control. We do not wait for these politicians to save us. We are agents. We are the protagonists. We set the terms of our struggle, and we struggle how we want to struggle and what issues that we want to struggle on. So if we deem that the fight against our capacity for solidarity, as Jen described, is our priority, that's our priority. We don't wait for Genocide Joe. We don't wait for Nancy Pelosi. We don't wait for any of the Democratic Party. We set our own terms. And so more broadly than that, I think, again, it is our chance to lay the blame on not just the Republican Party, like that's the easy answer. We need to be raising consciousness and tapping into consciousness that exists, right? There is consciousness that exists already that properly lays the blame on the Democrats for relying on the Supreme Court when it comes to abortion rights, for not using its federal power that it has with Biden being in the president, and is completely fed up with the lack of the fight and the capitulations to Republicans, right? There's already people fed up with that. And then there's people who are going to vote for Biden this election, vote for Democrats, right? And they're going to do so reluctantly. And DSA has the opportunity to speak to both of those audiences and say, no, we are opposed to both of these forces. We do not equate both of these forces, right? And the Republican Democrats is the same, but we are opposed to both of them because neither of them is going to be our pathway towards liberation collectively. We need an independent force, and DSA can present that independent force.
They do not believe that the Democratic Party is their path to a socialist country. So every single conservative influencer who tells you that the Democrats are literally socialist are lying to you. And these aren't even the most far left socialists in the country. These are like moderately far left socialists. They think that the Democrats capitulated too much to the Republicans, too much to the Supreme Court, too much to capitalism. They accept that maybe some of their members are going to vote for Joe Biden, but they're not happy about it. They want their own ticket.
That shows up and then also allows democratic input for people to become protagonists in the struggle. And it's no longer Democratic politicians that's going to save us. It's our DSA members ourselves that are going to save us.
Bing.
Thanks, Rashad. Emma, can I pass it on over to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hang on. This is going to be the typical conservative response. They're lying. They don't understand what they're saying. Democrats are totally socialist, bro. No. What is going on is that the left knows what's up and the right does not understand the left. The Republicans think they understand what's going on because they listen to conservative influencers who lie to them to make money, but Republicans really have no idea what's going on. Conservatives have no idea what's going on. They believe a conservative narrative that is unhinged from reality. So you're the one that's ignorant, Jeffrey. They believe every single thing that they're saying. They're not stupid. They're not mentally ill. They're not any of those things. They know what's up. You don't, because you listen to the wrong people.
I'm loving this, by the way. I don't get to talk to Rashad and Genevieve enough about this stuff, so I'm really digging here and all of it. So I would say that like there are really kind of two questions maybe embedded in this. Like one is there's a moral, ethical, whatever you want to call it, argument, and one is a practical argument, right?
I need more beer. Hang on.
In a large extent, I think the moral argument kind of speaks for itself. Shit's going down, so where the hell are we if we're not there? But I mean, there is a counter argument there about strategy and what, there's all kinds of stuff going down, and there's always going to be a lot going down. That's part of how this works. That's part of what we're trapped in. We have to think strategically and where we can spend our resources.
Naptown, cut this shit.
But like Genevieve said, we're a massive organization spread all over the U.S. I'm quite confident that we can do more than 5 different projects at the same time. That being said, this is a horrible moment in time for.
This is the cherry cheesecake one.
It's a horrible moment in time for a number of people, but it's a horrible moment in time for queer people. By standard counting of the population, DSA is vastly disproportionately queer. Now, if you look at some recent studies, like younger age groups are getting up into 25% queer. And I should say, mostly I try to use the word queer not as an umbrella term, in the way that activists from the 70s and 80s used it, meaning that you were a radical leftist.
Tayton, fuck you. And fuck you again. You are a fucking 2-time terrorist, but cheesecake is gross. What the fuck? Cheesecake is gross, and Tayton, show yourself out.
In addition to being LGBTIA, right? But sometimes it just makes a handy umbrella term.
Mayonnaise is terrorism. You will not convince me otherwise.
So some younger age groups are pushing 25% now. If we're trying to build a mass movement and we've got that many queer people in it and that many queer people in the population, how do we do it if we don't tell them that, their existential needs don't matter? That argument should be made, not could be made, but should be made for some other groups as well, right? But how do we do it if we don't?
I would much rather drink an IPA than eat anything with mayonnaise on it ever. Mayonnaise is terrorism. It's gross. I don't want to hear any more mention of mayonnaise in my chat. Fuck you guys.
Address what is a glaring existential moment. When Obama got into office, the U.S. and Russia, the population polling on gay rights was roughly equivalent. Very shortly thereafter, in Russia, they started these kind of don't say gay kind of laws and that kind of stuff. And you quickly saw public polling go down on questions of gay rights until all of a sudden there were camps in Chechnya, right?
True.
We know what the Christian fascists want to do to us. It's not a big secret. Where queer people end up, like Genevieve was alluding to earlier, is where the rest of the country is going to go to. So if we care about democracy and opposing fascism, this is the moment to do it. I think I better stop there. I appreciate it, Luke.
Beth, I timed you out because you were distracting in the chat. I answered your questions multiple times. They're questions that are not relevant to the conversation. And then you were shit-talking me in the chat, and I don't appreciate it. Beth, I don't know what the fuck is going on tonight, but I do not appreciate this. We're here to watch socialism. We're not here to troubleshoot. We're not here to talk about links that are coming out tomorrow. We're not here to do anything other than this.
Oh, thanks, Emma. So what I'm going to do is try and combine 3 of the questions that we have here in the Q&A, and I figure I'll pose the question, and I know when folks are hearing a question live, it can take a little while to stew on it and come up with a response. So I'll ask the question, and I'll let you 3 sit on it just a tiny bit, and then whoever feels so moved to respond, go ahead.
Ooh,
we don't necessarily have to go
raspberry, probably.
order. But I want to frame this question around talking
Chad does
with
need a fucking Ritalin.
other people. Best practices, how do you do it, so on and so forth. So there are multiple parts. How would you all talk with someone in the queer community who's against socialism? How would you integrate that?
Oh, that's a good
How
question.
might you talk with folks in a way that brings them out of particular silos? So working groups, commissions, and
So one of the questions is, if people didn't hear it, how do you talk to people in the queer community who are against socialism? So let's listen for that.
engages with issues together. We talked a lot about the connection of different issues. And then more generally, how would you describe the relationship between queer liberation and a lot of these broader movements around reproductive justice?
It's also a good
that includes
question.
cis and straight people, abortion access, HIV criminalization, and then how should queer people relate to the coalitions around them, and how should socialists orient to them? So in
Good
general, how should we
question.
imagine these different groups of people, different coalitions, so on and so forth, ideologies interacting, relating to each other?
They
And
don't
how do you
mean
have that
actual
conversation,
anarchy.
I suppose, with folks, is what I'm trying to get at here. So I'll give you all just a little while to kind of stew on that one, and then please, as you feel so moved, go ahead and speak up.
I will say, who's not me, go first, because I've gone first for all of these.
I'll go first, and y'all can.
I mean, they mentioned the goal at the very beginning of the presentation which is to liberate themselves from capitalism. The goal is always and forever to liberate themselves from capitalism. It's literally in the presentation description like multiple times. So they're not tiptoeing around anything. I mean, maybe you got here late, but they were very clear about what the goal is.
Can jump in when you want to. I'm trying to keep everything that was just asked in my head. One thing I would say is that the queer community is still oddly, transparently socialist, right? Yeah, and trans people in particular. So there are certainly people that
the queer community is obviously and transparently socialist. Oh, our white identitarian friend is back. Yes, genius. For the last 2.5 hours, we have been telling you what the problem is. When you've been complaining about being a poor victim because you're a white man, we've been telling you what the problem is. We've been showing you what the problem is. Had you paid any attention at all, you would know exactly and precisely what the problem is. And it's not that they're out to destroy and kill all white people. It's that they're out to abolish the United States as we know it. And you can say that's and if you want to provide fucking receipt, if you want to have an actual fucking conversation about this, rather than going white victimhood, white victimhood, white victimhood, white victimhood, white victimhood, you had opportunities in the course of this presentation to make the point that they're fucking Jewish, and you missed them entirely. You missed at least 5 opportunities where they were directly using your own right-wing fucking dissident talking points, where you could have said they're Jewish, they're Jewish, they're Jewish, they're Jewish, they're Jewish. Did you do that? No, because you were so focused on being a fucking white victim of the world that you didn't even hear that they gave you multiple opportunities to talk about them being Jewish. So that's your fucking fault, bro. You could have run with it. You could have made some good points that would have actually advanced the narrative on your side. But no, you had to be the poor, abused, white fucking victim of the fucking world. Now, let's go back and listen to the actual socialist talk about how the queer community is inherently socialist.
first, and y'all can jump in when you want to. I'm trying to keep everything that was just asked in my head. One thing I would say is that the queer community is still oddly, transparently socialist, right? Yeah, and trans people in particular. So there are certainly people that aren't, but as far as a singular community, trying to pull from a singular community, a socialist approach to queer people is probably about as easy as it's going to get. Pop
quiz for the chat. Why is a socialist approach to recruiting queers, why is that about as easy as it gets? Why are the socialists flat out telling us that the queer community is socialist and it's easy as shit to recruit more socialism from the queer community? While I'll wait for answers to that, I'll take Dragon Shell's chat here. I woke up at 6 a.m. I'm on a VPN after a new security law was passed in Hong Kong yesterday, just to be safe. I want to hear socialism in the chat. Enough with the white people keyboard warrior incels. Thank you. Why is it easy to recruit new socialists from the queer community? Because queer is a far left political ideology. That's what it is. Queer is not about being trans. It's not about being gay. Queers are against normativity. Queer is a Marxist political identity. Queer is anti-normative and want to abolish capitalism. They want to do that by abolishing the gender binary because queers are collectivists. Because the queer community is against hierarchy, which is a creation of capitalism. Because queer is a political term. It is not about an identity. It is a political term. Straight, cisgendered white men can be queer just like anyone else. Because queer is Marxism well, I'm not sure I would define it that way, Rottweiler, but okay. Okay. Queer has nothing to do with sex. It's an ideology. No Gnostic sex cult. Exactly.
Let's do it. But what I often have been using inside DSA, and I think it would work well outside DSA with other types of activists, is that circus tent analogy I was talking about. You know, how far are you going to go with what you're doing if you don't start addressing the intersectionality? And
intersectionality.
You know, the idea of the main tentpole being economic oppression sneaks the socialist perspective in there, even if you don't name it, right? So I've found that works pretty well.
I agree more with this, Rottweiler.
And kind of seeing how, in a simple way, that everything's tied together. There's something important I forgot, Luke. What am I missing? Or I'll just let somebody else go if somebody else is ready to
I can't hate Emma. Emma has a kind heart, even if Emma is crazy.
It's a complex question
Emma has a kind
I
heart.
posed. I'll let folks continue on.
I'll say that I mean, to answer it really, the question of like how to talk to like a trans person or a queer person who's like opposed to socialism very directly, I kind of like split this into 3 parts. The first part is like, look at who our enemies are. It's the fascist right. I've never met a queer person who doesn't.
Fascist means anti-capitalist.
Who isn't ready to acknowledge that these people are fascists. They know, they pay attention to what they say about us, and they know they want to exterminate us. And so like, look at who our enemies are. Second, like, look at how just trying to triangulate the centrist position is when people are actively like have a deep ideological political movement around exterminating us. If the only opposition to that is just trying to like surface the majority public opinion and just like represent that in order to get elected, that is exactly why there is this example, and this example of Democrats caving on trans rights. Like, and again, every trans person is aware of these, is frightened by them, and is frustrated by them. So like the logical conclusion of this is that the only way to actually like put up meaningful opposition to a fascist right-wing ascendant political movement is to have a strong left-wing political movement. Just having a fascist right in a center, like it's just going to drag that center towards that right. And I do like, trans people have all sorts of
said
like
the
different
Democrats are
reasons.
center.
Trans people who aren't in DSA have all sorts of different reasons for not being in DSA. And I don't necessarily like push people super hard that like I think there's a difference between agreeing that like something like this needs to exist and like having to be a part of it personally. I try to be gentle with people about that, but I think that works really effectively at least getting them to agree that something like this has to exist. And then if they want to get politically active, come be a part of this. But as Emma said, I've actually not really had this experience of a trans. I don't want to.
Naptown, cut
So
the
I've talked
shit.
to a lot of like trans organizational leaders of like policy organizations and people in like congressional offices and journalists and legislators and so on. And I don't know, I won't blow up anybody's spot, but a lot of them in private agree with what we're doing. And I want to say that on this call because the minority of these people are DSA members. The majority of them identify as democratic socialists. And I think that we should think seriously as an organization about why there are these people who are at the forefront of the struggle for trans rights in America who don't feel, I'm not going to like air their specific reasons, but they agree with us ideologically and they are skeptical of us organizationally. And like, I think there are things that we could do better to make ourselves like an environment that more people who agree with us ideologically and are ready to be politically active about this can feel comfortable being a part of DSA. But that being said, like there was another question, there was another sort of thing in there about how we interact with organizations outside of DSA. That's the thing that you missed, Emma. And this is a topic that's really interesting to me because like for sort of areas of like organizing and like that DSA is really involved in and believes are really important. And I'll pull out the examples of labor organizing and Palestine solidarity organizing. For those issue areas, the established kind of like vanguard of those movements are like, we would consider them to be kind of like more politically radical than DSA in some ways. Like we have labor unions, and then we have like the Palestinian solidarity organizations, and neither of those you could really describe as like liberal. Yeah, there are unions that have like leadership that is sort of complicitory and like isn't, you know, there's like reform that needs to happen, but fundamentally like unions are class struggle organizations. With trans rights and queer rights in general, the vanguard of this movement is largely like liberal nonprofit organizations. And that presents a struggle for us in like understanding how we relate to being a newcomer to this scene. Is like that the people who have been leading this for a long time is not like banner waving, like, you know, like oppositional force to the Democratic Party, like, you know, meeting workers where they're at in their workplaces and organizing them. It's liberal nonprofits. And my position is that in the same way that we have to treat like the places where this movement has housed itself with the same respect that we do with unions or with like Palestinian solidarity organizations to continue these two examples. And that's not to say that we have to subsume ourselves into liberal politics, and we should keep our identity as DSA. We should like talk about how socialism like bridges this with other sort of fights for liberation. And like, again, like my experience is that so many people are instantly ready to hear that. And so like, I don't feel like there's a challenge with this. And I feel like we can only benefit from being like, hey, we're here now, come join us in addition to the thing that you're doing. But like, I really fundamentally believe that if we want to be a positive contributor to this, and also that we want people who have been in those sort of like vanguard organizational positions to see DSA as viable, as a place that they want to be, to join us, we have to treat them with respect and like recognize that we're a relative newcomer to this policy space, and that we're only going to gain their respect, not by like telling them how to do what they're doing and insisting that like, oh, we've showed up, now we're like more right than everybody. Like we believe that in our heads. We're all socialists for a reason. But like, we have to show up and actually contribute materially. We have to actually like do things. We have to not just like table at their big coalition events. We have to kick fascist people off of school boards and put democratic socialists there and have those people like fight for trans kids in those schools and like say that we're doing this because we're democratic socialists. And I think that that's how we relate to these other organizations. I think is like show up in the same places as them, respect them for the work that they've done, but contribute the unique things that DSA as a democratic socialist institution that has a shitload of people, a ton of organizing chops, et cetera, contribute things that aren't happening right now. And, you know, be a part of a multi-tendency movement, so to speak, in that way.
Yeah, I caught that school board thing.
Thanks, Genevieve. Emma or Rashad? Rashad, I don't know if you want to take this one too.
Yeah, excuse me as I try to get my congestion out the way and not make faces at y'all this entire time. But I think Emma and Jen kind of covered a lot. The only two things I would kind of more quickly add is like in terms of breaking down silos within DSA. I think this is where having a political program is like a necessity, and like bringing a political program to life can really help to unite the struggles and strands within our organization, right? Like,
guys, we have about half an hour left of this. I need to go to the little socialist room, so I will be right back. I will let this play in the meantime. Please take good notes. Let me know if I miss anything, and I will be back in like 2 minutes.
Our 2024 program that's going to be released. NPC just passed last weekend, so we just have to release it onto the forums and whatnot, and really begin to bring it to life. It has a strong focus, right, on trans rights and bodily autonomy, for example, right. And so as we think about our labor work and winning labor unions and rank and file workers to our program, for example, like that is the program that people would be going to try to win people over to, for example. Those are the united politics that we are expressing as DSA. And so just quickly want to add, I think a program would really help. And secondly, to what Jen was describing, for example, about how we need to like show up, how we need to like recognize that like there's other organizations that either have a membership base of people, or mobilize people in a structured manner for campaigns and different things like that. I would consider that similar to like we need to do with labor unions is execute. We're talking about Marxism, right? A merger theory, right? We need to like embed ourselves into those struggles as open socialists and win them over to our program and have that level of like persuasion, right? But again, still being a part of the struggle. Those things are mutually exclusive. And so if we are doing that with an open socialist like banner and seeking to both win leadership in organizations that are structured as such and are capable of like us winning leadership, like labor union, for example, or when it comes to especially with the queer organizations and like NGOs, that's perfect energy to bring people into DSA as an organization for the first time, even different than it would be for a labor union, for example, to where like the
Naptown is big. What the fuck, Naptown? Has Grace taken over your account or something? What the fuck is going on? I feel like I'm giving Naptown special treatment that they really shouldn't be getting. Just because I want them to be nice to me in any future compilations that they do. Naptown, no more fucking around, okay?
merger's kind of more complicated with some of these social movements because it's nothing to really join. We can be a part of the campaigns and whatnot, but there's no real structure to join. And that's like part of the selling point is, what do we do when this is done? Who's making decisions on how this should operate? Come be a part of an organization type of thing. And so that's just all I would build on from what Jen said. But yeah, appreciate both of y'all for covering a lot of that.
Can I just jump in again real quick? I promise not to be a hog or any more of a hog than I am already. A recent evolution of mine that really just stems from this campaign, and the name of it is the power of language. The way the bodily autonomy was listed as part of the campaign name, the more I looked at it, the more I saw it as a way to start breaking down the silos that have been put up around these different subjects that keep us from working together on it. Now, personally, I've come more and more to use this just bodily autonomy as the name for the work. But I do believe in the power of language, and I do believe that coming up with words that show our socialist analysis in this regard can produce a lot of change. That's it.
I also want to jump in and add one more thing. It's really short. This is super practical. If you're in a DSA chapter that has like a repro justice working group, a queer socialist working group, a socialist feminist working, like we've had all of these sort of like ad hoc structures that all of this different work has been out. I have like so many chapters have come to me, people who want to do like the trans rights work and been like, I'm struggling with all of these existing formations in my chapter. Like the best advice that I could give you guys as people listening to this for that is to be like, okay, now like this has existed in all of these different sort of places. Now DSA's membership has instituted at the national level an umbrella that contains all of these things. So it's not that these other sort of like formations and working groups have to disappear. In fact, they shouldn't. Like, but there should be, if you're going to start like a trans rights and bodily autonomy organizing thing, like all of those different things show up to that and are all part of it. And you know, maybe that has structural implications for your chapter over time. Like my local chapter structure has like changed one way and changed back and whatever so many times over the decades. That's like normal and natural. But for like our practical immediate task, it's like you don't actually have to deal with the question of like, which thing is this housed under? Like, or do we have to like get rid of these things and create it? It's just like we have an umbrella for all of this now. And we're like going to organize this day of action. We're going to maybe do some like campaigns this year or whatever. Don't overthink it. Just bring everything under one umbrella because that's what the DSA membership has voted to do. That's my tip for you.
Thanks, Genevieve. So before we close out by hearing from Allison, who's going to speak a little bit about the relaunch of the Queer Socialist Working Group, I did want to see if I could tie in the remaining 3 questions into one, and I just can't do it. So what I'm going to do instead is read them and just let you choose the one that speaks to you the most. They are concerned with different topics, I think, distinct enough that, you know, I'll just let folks respond to the one that speaks to them the most. So the first one here is the material causes of queer oppression. How do those arise? And in tandem with that, why might it be that certain sections of the working class would buy into an ideology that doesn't benefit them materially? So that's one. Kind of let that stand there. The second one being what lessons we can take from Marxism.
No, we're not doing this, bro. We're not doing this. Last warning, next time you start bringing bullshit into my chat, I'm just going to ban you for this and all future shows.
And queer liberation when it comes to social reproduction, and then how might that impact our campaigns?
Wait, what? Oh, fuck you. Okay, this Cedar guy's getting banned. Goodbye. Like, what is this? Okay. I don't know what this is, Naptown.
And then the third one, returning to the theme of fascism, and how do we integrate our conceptions of queer liberation with a more, with George Jackson's conception of fascism, perhaps, which holds that fascism is not an ideology, rather a method.
It universally stands that dissident right-wingers cannot make it through a single fucking episode of Socialism Saturday without making it all about poor white fucking victimhood.
Method to allow capitalists to create a reaction based on the contradictions they themselves create. So fascism, social reproduction, ideology a little bit.
Oh, social reproduction. Look at that.
I'll let you all speak to those a little bit before we conclude.
Yes, speak to us about social reproduction.
I'll jump in real fast and start with the first one, or try to address the first one anyway. So, like historically, our version of capitalism, like we touched on earlier, has been very heavily dependent on like racism, sexism, in very painfully obvious ways. right? So not to beat up on this is not anyway. I think we can all be comfortable talking about like there was a reward for being a white man, or at least ostensibly a reward for being a white man in America for quite a long time. But when you have those systems of oppression where a cis man is going to remain a cis man. That's what it means to be a cis man, right? A white man's going to remain a white man. You can't suddenly subject a white man to racial oppression. But like at the height of conformism, or at least what I would call the height of conformism in America in the 50s, what you did see was a lot of people being ostracized for being queer. And queer at the time, if you look at a lot of people who have analyzed this, wasn't simply being LGBT, right?
You don't
or
say.
Gay
You
and
don't
lesbian,
say, Emma.
at the time, right?
You don't say.
It would have been being odd. You didn't fit in, right?
Cheers.
In this broader sense, you can start to understand why people always attack socialists for being queer and queer people for being socialists. That McCarthyism duality carries to this day. If you're standing on the street corner with a sign, you're going to hear pejoratives from both angles, usually simultaneously, right? You could attack people for not fitting in. And in that way, you didn't have to, while a white guy could understand that oppression was okay because they were seeing Black people being oppressed, so they knew that the system could oppress people. How do you keep good control over them if there is not some form of oppression you could subject them to at will? So there is that constant threat of being labeled as queer, and then you see that carry on to today. I mean, that's one of the reasons why queer people have trouble landing good jobs, receiving lower pay, and one of the reasons why trans people are have such a hard time holding jobs, and such a hard time holding jobs that interface with the public in particular.
Hang on. This is an interesting question. So let's just explore it for a second. Can we create a fictitious Supreme Court justice group that supersedes these other commie groups in case they do take over the country? Is there a mechanism in which group holds power in the end? Well, they want to abolish the Supreme Court. So naming something the Supreme Court justice group is probably not going to be the way to go about that. Also, they want to abolish all hierarchy, and so they are not going to create a world in which there is, well, there's always going to be the inner party and the outer party, isn't there? But like in theory, they're not going to buy into the idea of like some superseding group over all other groups. They're going to identify that as a hierarchy that they're going to want to abolish. Yeah, so I don't think that would work, but good question. Always interesting to think about new ideas. How is it the word gay has successfully been understood in its evolution, but queer has not? I don't know the answer to that, Dragon Tail, but good question. Maybe someone else has some ideas.
Being visibly queer breaks that rule and makes life freer for everyone, which is not the goal of capitalism, right?
Bing.
I said that rather roughly, but I think I got there. I'll let it go with that.
Thanks, Emma. Genevieve or Rashad?
Luke, could you just repeat the two questions? I see the one in the Q&A,
Sure.
the one about fascism. What was the other
Sure.
one?
Sure. The lessons that we can take from Marxism and queer liberation in regards to social reproduction, and how might that impact our current campaigns, and then the perhaps more material causes of queer oppression and how that might encourage someone to buy into an ideology that perhaps wouldn't ultimately benefit them.
Rashad, is it cool if I take the sort of like the queer theory-ish family one and you take the fascism one? Cool. Yeah, this is and I'm looking at the Q&A question here, and it prefaces this by mentioning that in the hundreds of anti-trans bills we've seen in recent years, there's almost always an exception for intersex people, so preventing adolescents and adults from getting gender-affirming healthcare while doing non-consensual surgeries on children. It seems this is designed to enforce a cis heteropatriarchal binary where the fascist right sees as the foundation of the family. And then it's like, what lessons can we take from Marxism and queer liberation when it comes to social reproduction? This is a really interesting question that there's kind of like two threads for me. There's one is the social reproduction, and then the other is actually like the theory of sexuality, because I think that the cis heteropatriarchal sort of like conception here is not just about how like humanity reproduces itself and controlling the means by which it does that, but it's actually, there's this deep like psychosexual thing that is separate from that and is about power and
Psychosexual.
subjugation. But I'll start with the
That's why they're into
the
kink.
social reproduction part, which is this kind of like leads in nicely from what Emma was saying, which is that, and to some of the other questions that have been submitted here about like relating to struggle, like finding things that can bring in cis and straight people that talk about abortion access, HIV criminalization, etc.
Wrong.
And ties together what we've been talking about this whole time with why like a socialist perspective on this is necessary, something that links these different forms of oppression and like liberation under one ideology, because the enemies that we have, for them, like the oppression intersects. They are oppressing all of these. We have this common enemy. They see these things as intrinsically linked. And so do we. And for when it comes to social reproduction, like that is what robbing people of bodily autonomy ultimately exists to do, is to take the people who are on top of a hierarchy and put them in a position to decide what happens with social reproduction and by extension, humanity's labor power. I mentioned in the chat earlier while someone was talking that like pretty objectively, the largest advance in bodily autonomy in human history is the abolition of slavery. And like that to this day, like the carceral system in the United States, the mass incarceration system exists fundamentally as like a racist theft of bodily autonomy from largely Black Americans. And like what slavery did in robbing people of its bodily autonomy, like it was about the chattel slavery was about like reproduction of labor power. That was like
robbing people of their bodily autonomy means that people were owned as private property. Slavery robbed people of their bodily autonomy because they were owned as private property by other people. They use the same argument for reproductive justice, which is another code name for abortion. They use the same argument to talk about adult supremacy, where they want to eliminate parental rights because they believe that children are considered to be the private property of their parents. And then they combine all of that into one overarching ideology that allows them to trans children, because trans children have bodily autonomy as well. And if trans children are not allowed to trans themselves when they are children, that means that you've taken away their bodily autonomy. Does everyone understand that? Does everyone understand how all the concepts link? You've got critical race theory, you've got abortion, you've got parental rights, you've got transing kids, all linked together under the idea of bodily autonomy. Does everyone understand that? Not in the way you think they do. This is not a groomer thing. Not in the way you think they do. It's not about grooming kids. In fact, I've heard them explicitly say on more than one occasion they do not want to sexualize kids. And I've heard them say this in their own private spaces. So this is a conservative interpretation of what we just heard. It's not actually real. When they're talking about bodily autonomy, they're talking about abolishing private property. Yeah, exactly. For hormones and stuff. Exactly. It's not about, and maybe you didn't mean it this way, so I apologize, but like it's not about grooming kids, it's about transing them, because transing kids gets rid of the gender binary, which is really what they want. Okay, let's go back and listen to that again just to be sure.
All of these, if we have this common enemy, they see these things as intrinsically linked. And so do we.
All good, bro.
And for
All good.
when it comes to social reproduction, like that is what robbing people of bodily autonomy ultimately exists to do, is to take the people who are on top of a hierarchy and put them in a position to decide what happens with social reproduction and by extension, humanity's labor power. I mentioned in the chat earlier while someone was talking that like pretty objectively, the largest advance in bodily autonomy in human history is the abolition of slavery. And like that to this day, like the carceral system in the United States, the mass incarceration system exists fundamentally as like a racist theft of bodily autonomy from largely Black Americans. And like what slavery did in robbing people of its bodily autonomy, like it was about, the chattel slavery was about like reproduction of labor power. That was like the economic motive. It wasn't just that these were like evil white people who were just doing this to be mean.
Bing.
It was like they wanted to do it so that they didn't have to work, and they like
Bing.
didn't care what happened to other people in order to like make that happen.
Bing.
And even though that's not exactly the circumstance that we're under today, like fundamentally the motivation is the same. It's to like create this biological hierarchy in order to control how humanity and thereby labor power is reproduced and then controlled once it's reproduced. So I think that that's like, how does this affect our campaigns? I don't know. It's the thing that we've said the whole time about like how we need to bring a socialist perspective to this so that it like, we don't just like win a bill and then our nonprofit like loses its funding because there's nothing else to fight for. It's like we have a sustained movement here that's building itself across kind of issue areas. But the other thing, sorry to ramble about this, but I'm very excited to have an opportunity to bring this up on this call, is that there's this whole other dimension to the fascist view of like control of gender and bodily autonomy and so on, which is that they're like the fascist.
All right, and we got a conservative in the chat over on Rumble. What is the bodily autonomy of an unborn child or the hierarchy of its mother? They do not believe that an unborn child is a human being that has bodily autonomy. Most of the world does not believe that an unborn child is a human being that has bodily autonomy. If you insist on continuing to fight the abortion fight, you will lose every election for the rest of your natural lives. If you don't want an abortion, don't get an abortion. But every single time you guys are harping on the abortion bullshit, you will lose because you refused to change hearts and minds. You refuse to fight this with any pragmatism. You lost the midterms in 2022. You lost in 2023. It's going to cost you 2024. How many more elections do you guys want to lose because you want to own the libs on abortion? I just like, your kids are going to live in a socialist utopia because you could not give up the fucking issue of abortion.
Ideology views both like power and sexuality as like fundamentally destructive forces. Like the ideas of like enforcing cis or heteronormativity, whatever, like that it's about like it's about penetration and domination and like control and subjugation.
That
and
sounds interesting.
ultimately
At least.
like that these are violent like ends and impulses. And the sort of like queer theory of like sexuality very intentionally and specifically rejects that and says that like sexuality can be a mechanism of like the creation of like harmony and love and so on. And that, yes, it can have like this reproductive function and whatever, but that's not what it's isolated to. That there is this whole other element of human relationality that leads people that there's all these like other components about like polyamory and like at different levels of like platonic and like sexual relationships between people, and all of these are part of sexual liberation, that we should be free to love each other and to like do with our bodies what we want and have like freedom as consenting adults to do that. And the fascist like opposition to that is that sexuality exists as a mechanism of control, and it exists to control people and hurt people and harm people who are like lower on the biological hierarchy rungs. And the idea of sex being for anything other than that, as like this really like fucked up like dominational like drive to power and to destroy and subjugate, is in itself threatening to fascism as an ideology at its core. And I could go on about this for a long time and probably should read more about it, but that feels important to point out in the context of this question, of like how, you know, about why the fascist right is enforcing this, is that it's not just about social reproduction. It's in part about that, but it's because a theory of sexuality, when they demonize trans people and gay people and so on, it's like that them having this sexuality is inherently harmful to other people around them and to children, and that they're seeking to create pain and destruction and whatever, because that is fundamentally the fascist like view of what sexuality is all about, period. And this is where like when there's like turfism and stuff come up, and this sort of like gender critical or like radical trans exclusionary radical feminism, whatever, like the bridge which bills itself as less left wing and liberatory for women, but it's fundamentally just like the fascist view of gender and sexuality, based on like biological determinism of your like sexual characteristics and attractions. And also it fundamentally views sexuality as destructive and harmful, and like male sexuality in particularly as destructive and harmful. And the people who are, you know, I could go on about this forever, but that's like why the turfism like isn't actually left wing and isn't like at the end of the day becomes actually aligned with the far right, and like their sort of like social media influencers are hanging out with the right wing social media influencers, is because at the end of the day they view sexuality as harmful and not like a tool of like, I don't know, like joy and liberation and whatever. Yeah, I'll stop talking about it because we only have so much time.
Thanks, Genevieve. I'll pass it on over to Rashad.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I will pick up on the kind of like the question about fascism and it like being less like an ideology and more of like a tool, and also asking about the like material kind of like what allows for this oppression to like materially occur. And so first and foremost, I would start with I think it was a historian like Gerald Horne. I've listened to a bunch of podcasts and read some of his books about history, and there's this common theme about right like fascism in the United States and you know, like racism and slavery and whatnot. And you know, one of the things that I've always kind of stuck with me is like fascism is inherently about.
Yeah, I heard Jack Posobiec wrote a book about this, and I was like, if you want to know why the right will lose, look at the people they prop up as influencers who lie to them for money. Lie, 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 lie for money, honey. No, Elisa, your question was not about hierarchy. It wasn't. Don't bullshit. I fucking like conservatives always think that they're smarter than me when really they reveal how kind of like dumb they're being by pretending that they're smarter than me. No, your question was about abortion. Don't fucking pretend that your question was not about abortion, because you're looking to have me give a very specific answer on abortion. And now Elisa is confirming that her question was about abortion because she's saying, I don't think sacrificing any human child is winning. Well, Elisa, because of people like you, we're going to lose everything, and don't complain when it happens because I told you so and you didn't want to listen. We only have a couple more minutes of this, guys. Thank God for small favors. It's been one of those nights. If you have not been one of the people who's been making my life difficult tonight, I appreciate you. Don't confuse my yelling at the troublemakers and the people who are praying for me to give them a different answer than I gave them last week or a couple weeks ago when they asked exactly the same questions as annoyance with you. I appreciate most of you. Thank you for coming to Socialism Saturday. Yeah, it brings out all the crazies on the right perpetually. Anyway, let's finish up. I'm gonna order some ice cream or something to cry into tonight after this stream. All right.
Some sort of class collaboration, right? It's about like some sort
Maybe a
of like
taco.
collaboration.
Maybe I'll
to
get a
how do you
taco.
exploit some social contradiction that exists in order for that to then be this capitalist class is now you're going to side with, you know, these workers who are more riled up over this social contradiction as opposed to their economic contradiction and like their class position, for example. And so I think that can really go downstream to when we think about George Jackson's analysis of a fascist state, right? That like America as like a fascist state. And, you know, I think whether or not you agree with that exact terminology, I think there's a lot to be said there to connect to where I was going in the beginning when I opened was we have minoritarian institutions that allow for that small minority of capitalist interest, and they only need a minority of the population because of the way our Senate is structured, right? Because of the way the Electoral College is to really be bought in to this culture war. So what then allows for this, if a minority of people are fighting for this, what are the actual institutions that allow for these policies to be implemented? This is where we have to point our eyes at our undemocratic political system and the underlying constitution that enshrines that political system. So let's say we take the courts, for example, right? Yeah.
And Elisa, in typical conservative fashion, has resorted to insulting me over on Rumble. So Elisa got her ass banned for the remainder of this stream. And if Elisa wants to continue to do that in the future, Elisa will get herself permanently banned because the $1 Rumble rants that you send me most of the time, Elisa, just aren't worth it to me if you can't keep your own shit together. Thank you, Dragontail. I appreciate you.
That is a Christian court, right? That is a Christian nationalist fascist court that's going to, you know, overturn Roe v. Wade's and things like that. But that is also capital's court at the same
Capitalist
time. It is
court.
the Christian's court and it is the capital's court. But at the end of the day, it is capital's court first and foremost. And so just again, that level of class collaboration is used to legitimize, right, these minoritarian institutions as being in the interest of, you know, working class people that may be a part you know, that may be a part of this base of some sort of social contradiction that, right, the capitalist class and, you know, again, like, you know, we think about like the Trump kind of movement and that level of like the far right movement, it's like advertising to like keep stoking that, right? It's not even just to win, right? Jen was like, they, you know, push legislation, right, for agitational purposes, for example, right? They do a lot of the tactics that, you know, we would want our electeds to do and be pushing for, you know, agitational legislation to rile up a movement. But the biggest difference is our movement is in the interest of a multiracial working class majority, and theirs is in the interest of the capitalist class and minority of people who really buy into those social contradictions. But again, if it's a minority of people, we have to ask the question, how the heck does it still get implemented? And we have a minoritarian state with institutions like the Supreme Court that will continually manifest minority rule. So as Jen was talking about, we have to have a horizon that's bigger than just our reforms. And we have a caucus called Reform Revolution that can help us remember the saying. But again, revolutionary horizon has to attack smashing those minoritarian institutions so that the working class majorities, you know, a position which is way more socially progressive than this minoritarian culture war can be implemented, and majority rule can be what is manifested as opposed to minority rule.
Thanks so much, Rashad. And thanks to all three of our panelists for just engaging us in a really interesting conversation. This is definitely one that folks will want to listen back to once it's posted on YouTube. It's going to be on Class as well, which is the DSA's podcast. So you can go at half speed, you can pause. There's just so much content and really interesting and stimulating points that folks have made. Before we wrap up, I did want to turn it over to Ali, who recently led the relaunch of the Queer Socialist Working Group and was hoping that Ali can speak with us a little bit.
All right. Hey, comrades, can you hear me?
Hi, Allie.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to NPEC for being able to put this on. And I want to say thank you so much to the panelists for giving your ideas tonight. I think the intersection of Marxism and queer liberation is one that's not oft talked about. And I'm so happy to see that we have such a diversity of ideas here and such a diversity of thought and approach and action. One thing I wanted to seize on was Jen talking about having a united queer umbrella under which queer organizing in DSA can happen, and that that I'm here to represent one of those umbrellas. I am one on the steering committee, ex-co-chair of the Queer Socialist Working Group. It is a national working group throughout the entirety of DSA, across the whole country, of chapters coming together to discuss what it is that we are going to do locally for queer liberation. How do we actually affect that, and how do we make that possible? We are a place of inspiration. We are a place where queer socialist working groups of different chapters have come together historically, even before convention of 2023, to come together to talk about our plans, our projects, how we were going to split that, and how we were going.
I just want to point out that every time conservatives have a conniption over Dylan Mulvaney, they drive more people into the queer socialist working group in the DSA, because that's how this works.
To be able to implement that and give each other ideas on how we were going to do that forward. And the adoption of the Trans Rights and Bodily Autonomy campaign is definitely given a regiment to that, a very structured regiment that we never really had before. But Queer Socialist Working Group is still here. We still want to create a space where queer people in specific can come together to talk about how we are about our own personal struggles and how they are interleaved and interconnected, like Emma was saying, intersectionally with each other. We have monthly meetings. We are still in the process of reformation. We passed bylaws last year. We have a solid core of people. We've pioneered Still Here, Still Queer, a in-depth look at what queer organizing in DSA has accomplished thus far and what we are looking to accomplish in the future. I hope to see many of you there when we do that event again. And I would happily ask you to all join Queer Socialist Working Group, as well as participating in the Trans Rights and Bodily Autonomy campaign. This is, we are where queers are going to feel safe, we're going to feel comfortable, we're going to feel inspired, we are going to feel active, we are going to feel, for people who feel like queer organizing just hasn't had a home in DSA before, we are here to make sure you never feel that way again. So happy to be here. Thank you so much to NPEC for giving me this time. Join Queer Socialist Working Group. I'll make sure to give you all a link that you can send out. All right. Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you, Ali.
Thanks so much, Ali. And any links that folks have from our panelists or from Ali, I'll be able to email.
All right. That's basically it. We made it. Well, another banner, Socialism Saturday. We did get a lot of good clips. They said the quiet part out loud. I may have looked like I wasn't clipping, but what I was doing was marking the timestamp in StreamYard. So I'm going to go back and clip it later rather than doing it midstream. Yeah, another banner, Socialism Saturday for conservatives acting like retards in my chat. I don't really know what to do about that. I continue to wonder, I really just continue to wonder what is going to be required for conservatives to start taking this seriously, or right-wingers to start taking this seriously. And I just don't know the answer to that. And it's really aggravating and infuriating for me that it probably literally is going to be getting their kids taken away and getting their kids trans by the state. I just don't even know what to say. I truly don't. Did we get a clip of the Gnostic sex cult? No. Another Socialism Saturday about queer Marxism. Another Socialism Saturday in which there was no indication of any sort of a Gnostic sex cult at all. Yup, they'll start noticing what's going on when we're actually in the utopia or when the revolution actually starts, which I don't actually think will be that long. Whatever. We are totally effed. We are totally effed because of the fecklessness of people who claim to be against the far left. And I don't know what to do about that other than to continue to show up and continue to talk about it and continue to show people what's going on. So I appreciate everyone who came out for Socialism Saturday. I apologize for being in a little bit of a mood today. But guess what? I've got alcohol. And I hope you do too. All right, I'm going to go get some comfort food now. I'll be back on Monday. We'll do movie night tomorrow in the supporter Discord. I will be sending out links to movie night, to our community Zooms tomorrow on the Substack. You'll be getting an email newsletter, so pay attention to that. Those are the current links for this week. That'll get you into the supporter Discord tomorrow. That will get you into the community Zoom calls on Monday and Wednesday. And yeah, if you want to support my work, head over there. Sign up for $8 a month, $80 a year. I don't know. Maybe it'll help. Maybe it won't. Maybe it just feels like we're helping. Maybe we're just spinning our wheels. I have no idea. But we're going to watch a movie tomorrow night at 8 p.m. and it's going to be awesome. All right, guys. That's all I have. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye.